From the top rope and the Great American Bash, I bid you all good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you may be in this great land of ours or around the world. Welcome to the $55 million studio. I'm the Pro Wrestle Machine. Whether you're a longtime fan reliving these monumental events or a newcomer eager to understand wrestling's rich history, you're in the right place. This episode is packed with insights, opinions, and a few surprises along the way. Let's get into this issue. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. November 22, 1999 Observer Newsletter. WWF Survivor Series Review, Steve Austin Neck Trouble. By Dave Meltzer. In an industry with no rules, regulations or morals, there is nothing that happened this week that was out of the ordinary. And that's sad. The big story this week should have been that the biggest star in wrestling today has his career in jeopardy due to finding out just how badly thrashed his neck is. But the assembly line churns further, and whether it's Steve Austin's career, despite what he's meant to the revitalization of the industry, or anyone else's, there is no time for reflection. In fact, over the past few days, there has been far more talk about how the WWF handled the situation, trying to milk one last buy rate out of his name, and a parody that WCW did the next night on Jim Ross, and whether it was hilarious or tasteless, and obviously it was both, then on the potential of the career being in jeopardy of Austin. In fact, whatever discussion there is of Austin's injury is limited to the idea that maybe the WWF is vulnerable for the ratings gap closing if Austin's career is in jeopardy. As far as Austin's future if he can't wrestle, the belief is that the producers of Nash Bridges are still interested in doing a spin-off television series starring Steve Williams in the role of Jake Cage. Because it was so important, in these days of quick transmission of news, to keep the lid on the Austin story for protection of the buy rate. At this point we're not exactly clear what the story is. What we do know is that Austin underwent tests on or around November 5th on his bad neck that was originally injured by an Owen Hart errant tombstone piledriver on August 3, 1997 at the Meadowlands and re-aggravated earlier in the week. There was concern at the time of the original injury that he could never return, and he was forced to modify his style. No backdrops and no piledrivers, for instance. He came back to be the biggest merchandise seller and one of the two biggest drawing cards on a nightly basis that this industry may have ever seen. It's not even clear what happened to cause a re-aggravation of the injury. The only thing we know is that the results of the tests were said to be sobering, to the point it was suggested that he not wrestle again, and that the WWF desperately tried to keep that news under wraps until after the Survivor Series pay-per-view. There were hints out there. A strong rumor spread the day of the show that Austin wouldn't appear, but as many people felt it was some sort of a dispute with Vince McMahon or a refusal to do a job, rather than what it really was. From when the WWF received the word about Austin, knowing full well that he wasn't going to wrestle on Survivor Series, they had several opportunities to shoot angles to explain this fact. Granted, false advertising is an accepted part of business. That doesn't make it any more right than any other form of fraudulent advertising, just it goes on with such regularity that it has become accepted. In a sense this was no different than what WCW did 2 weeks earlier, advertising Hulk Hogan vs. Sting as a pay-per-view main event, knowing full well, and this was an executive decision, and not even a career-threatening injury that forced the company's hand, that they weren't going to present that match. It is one thing to play bait and switch every Monday for television ratings due to competition, which also isn't honest, but it's not an honest business. It's another when the consumer pays $30 to see a show and the company continues to advertise knowing full well what it is advertising won't happen. In both cases this past month each company did a substitution, and put the substitute over in an apparent title change, although WCW told people it didn't count the next day, as a way to pacify the paying crowd and end the show on the needed happy note. There is no defending what WCW did in the Hogan situation, even though they did tone down the hype of the match that wouldn't take place when the decision was made, and even pulled the match listing from its website, which means nothing since they continued to advertise it on television. And WCW received tremendous criticism, deservedly so, a few years back when they continued to hype Scott Hall for being on an important pay-per-view match knowing full well he was in rehab and wouldn't be there. Far more than WWF, they've been guilty of false advertising of performers on house shows, often because management considers house show attendance to be of relatively low priority. In the long run, judging by the house show attendance today, WCW is now paying the price for that. This was certainly no better, and in some ways worse. This was being pushed as a one-match card. The biggest pay-per-view draw, by far, is Austin. He may really be the only true pay-per-view draw in the industry, and even if not, it is clear that is how Titan management sees things. With the exception of China vs. Jericho, which was not a match that drew one extra buy, WWF felt so strongly it was a one-match show that Vince McMahon didn't even come up with an undercard until 5 days before the show, and the undercard was barely pushed at all on television, and his adding himself as referee wasn't even announced until after Austin's injury. Austin missed his weekend house shows due to what was announced in the buildings as an injury, but the injury was never acknowledged on Raw or anywhere else. They could have done an angle on Raw, SmackDown, or even Sunday Night Heat, and it's obvious why they didn't. So midway through the pay-per-view, Hunter Hearst Helmsley taunted Austin, who ran after him, and the way he was running it was obvious there was something very wrong. A car came. The way it was shot enabled a stuntman dressed as Austin to run in front of the car and take the same hit the stuntman pretending to be David Flair took on Nitro 2 weeks earlier. A few minutes later, the fans were told that due to the accident, Austin wouldn't be participating in the advertised main event. Big Show took his place and, to pacify the fans, won the title. If they truly felt their new storyline was that good, they could have done all this on Raw or SmackDown. By not doing so, it's acknowledgement they knew full well that Big Show being in Austin's spot would cost them significant amounts of money in buys the day of the show. Can you imagine if 2 weeks before the boxing match held the night before, that Evander Holyfield messed up his neck? They knew he couldn't fight, kept the news secret, and midway through the show did an angle that he fell down while jumping rope and the fight was cancelled? I know the next argument. That's sports. This isn't sports. It's entertainment. Different rules apply. Okay, let's say Garth Brooks was on pay-per-view next week, as part of a big country music festival. There were other major names on the show, but nobody is bigger than Brooks, and he was clearly the main attraction. 2 weeks before, his voice was gone and the doctors said it wouldn't be okay for the concert. The promoters panicked, knowing it would cost them millions if the truth got out. They continued to advertise it. They continued to send him on talk shows and avoided letting on that his voice was gone by just having him do cameos playing the guitar and smiling, until the day of the show. They had a 1-hour pregame show before the pay-per-view where they showed him, to combat rumors that had sifted out that he wasn't going to appear. And then, after everyone had paid their money, he pretended to fall down, and suddenly, his voice was gone and he didn't perform. By entertainment standards, would that be considered not false advertising? So when panic time comes, Vince McMahon went with the big guy. Paul White won the three-way and ended the show as WWF champion. Something needed to be done to heat him up anyway, as his nearly $1 million per year downside guarantee wasn't justified by his position in the pecking order or by how over he was, even after doing an angle based on cancer, that being controversial coming not that many weeks after a cancer death of great proportions within the industry. In the grand scheme of things, doing an angle based on a huge story in the industry about the heroic, but losing cancer fight of a popular referee, or whomever it was actually based on, which ended in comedy, is no better, and maybe worse, than mocking someone's Bell's palsy. The skit on Nitro on November 15th where Ed Ferrara, mocking Jim Ross, and bringing in the real Steve Dr. Death Williams as his sidekick on a spoof of a WWF angle from several months ago was, depending upon who you talk with, either the most tasteless thing in wrestling, or the funniest in a long time. It was both. Ferrara was absolutely sensational in his portrayal of Ross. He rendered obsolete previous segments with Kevin Nash, which were kindergarten play quality in comparison. Both companies, being what this war has turned into, need to sign Jason Sensation, who is the best in the world at this, probably more than bid for Ric Flair if he becomes a free agent. While it was clearly mean-spirited, the bottom line is this is a mean-spirited wrestling war and Ross is a key visible player in that war and thus is open for that sort of thing. In his role as announcer, he's made knocks at other products including WCW's, some of which were valid and others of which clearly were mean-spirited. The mocking of Ross football references, such as talking about one of the Mexican wrestlers as coming from Tijuana State University, talking about his boy Dr. Death being a 4-time All-American, screaming the quick sound bites, making fun of Ross, saying he's the best play-by-play man in wrestling, something he himself said in an angle, and eating a lot of inside ribs making fun of things he says backstage, not to mention Ferrara screaming, "Who's your daddy, Silver King?" was nothing short of brilliant. Ferrara came out with the same black shirt Ross often wears, his cowboy hat, talked about his barbecue sauce while the poor Mexicans were placed in an utterly racist piñata on a pole match, made even sillier because the piñata fell from the pole with all the money and nobody could touch it and the wrestlers had to ignore it and keep going for their 5 minutes until Dr. Death would destroy them all for real. It should be noted, as 3 of them ended up in the hospital after the match, but today, that's just fun and games as well. Dandy with a possible broken collarbone, which is a pretty serious injury for a wrestler, Juventud Guerrera with a possible AC joint separation, which is one of those nagging injuries that is no fun whatsoever, and psychosis re-injuring his bad ankle. There was a lot of underlying themes to this angle, with Williams, whose WCW appearance was a huge surprise, anxious to do it to get back at what he perceived was a longtime friend who turned his back on him, since it was Ross' dubious job description to be the one to give Williams the marching orders that he was being let go. And when Williams' lawyer came back saying his contract was guaranteed in the event of an injury and his injury hadn't fully healed, was also one of the ones, along with Bruce Pritchard, who gave Williams the marching orders to do the FMW tour, which, no matter what the idea behind it was, the end result was that when he refused, it gave WWF the legal justification to terminate his contract. The irony, according to a high-ranking WWF source caught in the middle of Russo/Ross battles at the time, is that Williams was nothing but a political pawn in the WWF for those battles. It was Russo who convinced McMahon that there was nothing marketable the company could do with Williams, who got his job almost entirely at Ross' urging, and McMahon made the call to get rid of him, and Ross' job was to convey that message to the talent. The irony of them then hiring Williams almost immediately after his being let go by WWF, no doubt largely for this moment, shows the exact role of wrestlers today as manipulated pawns in a high-stakes no-rules poker game. If anyone was happier to be there than Williams, it was Tony Schiavone. According to those who know him, claim he hates Ross more than any human being on earth, dating back to the TBS decision 10 years ago to go from co-lead announcers on WCW Saturday Night, which at the time was the company's flagship wrestling show, to a singular announcer, leading to Schiavone being taken off the show. Schiavone has always blamed the demotion on Ross' backstage manipulations, making the blow more unfair in his mind, even though Ross was generally considered by far the better wrestling announcer of the two. Since that point, the two have had histories of jumping back and forth between promotions due to demotions under the other. In fact, Schiavone worked heavily with Ferrara on scripting the parody and setting up spots. The fact is, the WWF, and Ferrara himself, did the same thing to Ross when he was down and out, mocking his condition and his announcing as a way to get him off the air in favor of making the fans accept Michael Cole as the real Raw announcer as opposed to a temporary sub until the vaunted Ross return. By portraying it as if the former announcer had mentally gone off the deep end due to his affliction, Cole would no longer be seen as a fill-in and suffer from the criticism the comparisons would bring. Largely due to a combination of pressure from Austin at the last minute, who wanted Ross to call his WrestleMania match with Rock, and resulting fan reaction to the angle, or maybe his own clever ability to manipulate such, the angle to turn him heel backfired in the writers' faces, and he was back as the regular announcer in spite of his affliction. Now those same writers, who regularly butted heads with Ross when working in the same company over philosophical and conceptual differences in what the product should be, and put in a situation where mocking show's attitude, did something that absolutely was no worse than WWF would, and many times has, done. Now Ross is riding high, at least from a public perception. He's the most well-known, and most imitated, voice of wrestling of this era. He's absolutely in a position for being mimicked. Except for one thing about the portrayal. The mocking of Ross' facial features, which are still suffering from the effect of 2 bouts with Bell's palsy, only serve to make WCW look pathetic for doing it and leave people hating an otherwise hilarious piece of sports entertainment. And they still haven't figured it out. It doesn't cross the line by the standards of wrestling because the WWF did it themselves, at a time when Ross' future was far more uncertain. But it's also interesting the dichotomy of the response we got. With 1 or 2 exceptions, everyone in wrestling we discussed it with at press time with, and there were many thought it was hilarious and there was nothing wrong with it, not all of whom were people who disliked Ross. Not one caller or emailer who didn't in some form work in the business agreed with that viewpoint, garnering the most negative fan reaction to anything on television since that legendary night when Kevin Nash killed the first hour of Nitro. The fact and the blatant false advertising by its competitors the previous day, don't cross the line, shows just how sick those standards of wrestling have become. Kevin Randleman captured the UFC heavyweight title in what was described as a boring main event on November 14th at Tokyo Bay NK Hall, but what took place within the octagon in Japan turned out to be of minor news value as compared with what took place backstage after the show. Akira Maeda, the president of Rings and a recently retired wrestling/worked martial arts star in Japan, was in a hallway talking with some reporters. At approximately 6:25 p.m., he was punched from behind by Yoji Anjo, another former pro wrestler who has done both Vale Tudo and K1 matches, and was originally to appear on this show. Anjo's appearance was cancelled just a few days before because of a failure to find him an opponent. Virtually everyone there believed the incident to not be a pro wrestling angle. Police were called and reports were filed at about 9 p.m. that evening. Maeda, 40, who was punched in the right temple, fell into a wall as he went down, opening up a cut over his left eye and bled heavily from the cut. He needed 4 stitches to close the deep wound. The description given is that Anjo, seeing Maeda, who he has had heat with for at least 8 years and hasn't seen in 3 years, ran at him from a position described as sideways and behind Maeda, who couldn't have seen it coming, and threw the punch staggering Maeda, who fell into the wall and went down. He was not knocked out, but was taken to a hospital for observation. He returned to the building after being checked out and declined at that point to file charges. The ring's promotion the next day did file charges. Naturally, since both Maeda and Anjo are pro wrestlers, and because this is reminiscent of a Japanese-style angle, some would be dubious as to what this is. The filing of criminal charges seems to answer that question, because of the legal dangers of filing a false criminal report. The only true answer is waiting a few months for history to take its course and truly answer the question. If Maeda comes out of retirement for a big match with Anjo, 32, that would clearly explain what it is. And if he doesn't, that would also explain what it is. Because it occurred in front of many reporters and involved Maeda, one of the biggest pro wrestler stars in the history of Japan, the story was covered as huge news everywhere. There is much history between the two. They were together in the Second Universal Wrestling Federation promotion, where Maeda was the top star and Anjo a prelim boy. After that promotion folded, they went into separate promotions, Maeda forming rings and Anjo went to UWFI. There was something of a feud between the two promotions over the years, and both had gone back and forth over the years in the press about each other. In late 1996, at a party for Samurai TV, the two had basically an altercation that was almost a secret, behind closed doors that was never reported on, with Maeda apparently hitting or slapping Anjo, and the two hadn't seen each other since. Anjo, when questioned after the incident, brought up the 1996 problem and said this was his retribution for Maeda hitting many wrestlers in the past. Both have had out-of-the-ring altercations in the past. Maeda had gotten into fights with other wrestlers in his New Japan days where he acquired a rebellious shooter image because of his training under Karl Gotch and his successful promoting of the style of original and second UWF, which he was the top draw in, to pro wrestling fans as being actual shooting even though it was simply a more serious style of working. When he came back to New Japan in 1986, Maeda had gotten in many out-of-the-ring problems, including a knockout in a bar fight with Keiji Muto and a famous in-ring incident of a match falling apart with Andre the Giant, the latter of which wasn't his fault as Andre was the one who acted unprofessionally first. If this wasn't an angle, then it could be accurately called almost poetic justice. Maeda's career actually skyrocketed in the aftermath of a similar cowardly incident. During a 6-man tag match in 1987, while Riki Choshu's arms were tied up holding another wrestler in a scorpion, Maeda threw a shoot kick with full force as opposed to a worked kick to the eye. The kick broke Choshu's orbital bone and caused him to bleed profusely and knocked him out of action for 6 weeks during the important tag team tournament tour. This caused Maeda to be first suspended, despite the taking 2 of the company's 3 top draws out of its important tournament tour, and later fired by New Japan. Ironically, this going against the very grain of trust that pro wrestling has to be built on to survive, made him such a celebrity as a renegade shooter that he became a bigger pro wrestling and mainstream sports star than ever, and the promotion he formed several months later, the second UWF, almost directly, became the hottest pro wrestling company in the world in 1988-89. Although the incidents were entirely different, there are stunning similarities when it comes to fan reaction to the aftermath of Maeda's incident and to the aftermath of the 1997 Survivor Series. Anjo had his own famous outside-the-ring altercation where he challenged Rickson Gracie to an impromptu fight in Gracie's dojo in Southern California, and wound up getting pummeled in an incident that embarrassed and many say was a key reason for the loss in popularity of UWFI. The Big Show's title win highlighted a Survivor Series that lived up all the promise that the lineup indicated. Unfortunately, that was not a good thing. The matches, which on paper looked to have no chance, were kept short. But the almost total lack of crowd heat in the matches that were given time, combined with marginal talent which up to this point had been fairly well protected being exposed, China and Mean Street Posse in particular, and the Austin bait and switch, left one with a bad feeling when the show ended. The show on November 14th sold out weeks in advance at the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit with 18,735 fans, which was 17,294 paying $841,095 and another $153,536 in merchandise. 1. Godfather Charles Wright and D'Lo Brown, Oxy Connor, and Headbangers, Glenn Ruth and Charles Warrington, won an elimination match over the Dudleys, Mark LaMonica and Devin Hughes, and the Acolytes, John Leafield and Ron Simmons, in 9:36. Every member of the Godfather's team came dressed as pimps. Godfather wouldn't offer the Dudleys the hose because they seemed grossed out by them. Fast-paced match. Actually, this was the one match on the show better on paper than it figured to be, but it had no heat. Bradshaw eliminated Thrasher by pinning him at 3:40 with a clothesline. Mosh was out next, being pinned by Bubba after a 3D in 4:57. Bradshaw was DQ'd after hitting Brown and partner Bubba with really hard chair shots in 5:52. Devon and Farouk couldn't get along, as they fought each other over who would get to pin Bubba. Devon covered him, but Farouk leg dropped Devon. They both went outside the ring to settle things, and faster than any man in history has ever counted to 10, they were both counted out at 6:45. This left Bubba against Brown and Godfather, the latter of whom never tagged in once by this point, which probably explains why the match was better than expected. Bubba blocked a Brown Frankensteiner off the top, dropping him with a top rope powerbomb. Godfather finally tagged in, signaling they were going to the finish. He squashed Bubba with a hoe train, which isn't what it sounds like, and Brown pinned him after a frog splash. 2¼ stars. 2. Kurt Angle pinned Sean Stasiak, Sean Stepich, in 5:56. They figured this one right. Angle came out doing some really good 70s style wrestling in 30 seconds and the place was already chanting boring. By the 90 seconds mark, they were booing Angle and all he had done was a lot of good wrestling moves. Angle turned heel on the fans, telling them that you don't boo an Olympic gold medalist. Angle ended up winning with a Samoan drop. Angle looked impressive and this was the best Stasiak has looked since coming to the WWF, not that anyone actually picked up on it. 1½ stars. 3. Val Venus, Sean Morley, and Mark Henry and Gangrel David Heath, and Steve Blackman beat British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith and Rodney Lionheart, and Pete Gas and Joey Abs, Jason Arndt, in 9:10. Pete Gas is getting better, but he and Rodney were really exposed badly on the big stage where they had to go a few minutes. Gas clearly didn't belong there and the lack of heat only emphasized it. Finally, Blackman put him out of his misery with a pin after a high kick in 2:56. Gangrel pinned Rodney in 4:21 after an implant DDT after Abs accidentally punched him. Henry pinned Abs in 6:02 after a splash, leaving Bulldog against all four. Bulldog, put in the babyface position, made his comeback, but absolutely nobody cared. He pinned Gangrel after a superplex while standing on the top rope in 6:46. Try that move at home for those of you with disintegrated discs and holes in your spine. He pinned Blackman at 7:32 with a fisherman's suplex. Usually this scenario is one of the easiest ways to get heat, but I don't think setting every member of the audience on fire would have worked on this night. Henry splashed Bulldog, and Venus then pinned him with a money shot, which is the same move I saw given 3 other different names on the ECW syndicated TV show the previous night. 1/4 star. 4. Mae Young and Fabulous Moolah Lillian Ellison, and Terry Pac, and Deborah Marshall, beat Jacqueline Moore, and Terry Boatwright, and Luna, Gertrude Vachon Heath, and Ivory, Lisa Moretti, in 1:53. It was really awful, but at least it was kept short enough that Lawler never ran out of recycled Helen Hart jokes about Moolah and Mae Young. Young took a bump out of the ring right away. Jacqueline delivered the worst DDT in history on Tori. Moolah and Mae Young delivered the slowest double clothesline in history on Ivory and Moolah pinned her. Picture Steve Williams and Terry Gordy doing the double tackle spot in their primes. Okay, this move looked nothing like that. Deborah pulled Terry's top off after the match, leaving her in her black bra. For whatever reason, somebody must be getting nervous because they clearly avoided shooting Terry from the front in her bra, and mistakes like that simply don't happen on WWF broadcasts. Lawler did get to say that her cups runneth over. It fell short, or long of its promise of being the worst match of all time. -1½ stars. 5. Kane Glenn Jacobs beat X-Pac, Sean Waltman, via DQ in 4:14. X-Pac used some nice kicks. Kane used the choke slam but Road Dogg pulled Kane off. X-Pac came back with the worst looking X-Factor in his life but Kane kicked out. X-Pac came off the top. Kane caught him and was about to deliver a tombstone, when Triple H ran in and hit Kane with a title belt for the DQ. Tori came back for the save, but X-Pac, not seeing it was a woman, gave her a spin kick which she sold great. Unfortunately, the guy who chose the replay angles wasn't so great, as the first one clearly showed the kick missing her by a foot. Subsequent replay shots were given angles that couldn't show how badly it missed. Kane woke up and DX ran. X-Pac is the best wrestler I've ever seen that almost always has bad matches on pay-per-view. 1/2 star. 6. Big Show, Paul White. Won a handicap match over Big Boss Man, Ray Traylor, Prince Albert, Matt Bloom, and Midian Dennis Knight, and Viscera, Nelson Frazier Jr., in 127. Bossman was supposed to team with Takamichi Inoku, Sho Funaki, and Blue Meanie, but he beat all of them up in the dressing room before the match started. Those poor guys who were 1/3 his size were pleading with him that they were trying to help him. Sho now wrestles in a t-shirt, which tells you all you need to know about his discipline when it comes to dieting of late. Sho choke slammed and pinned Midian in 18, Albert in 30 and Viscera at 55. Bossman then simply left the ring and taunted Sho for a while. Sho, despite the guy ridiculing his father's death, decided to stay in the ring because that's the sportsmanlike thing to do. Bossman left and was counted out in 127. I guess it could have been worse, but that's like saying a mugging could have been a shooting. -1 stars. At this point, Austin was hit by a car. Actually, the stuntman was hit by a car. We were all emphatically told that Austin hadn't lost consciousness. They didn't want anyone to think for a second they were teasing Austin was dead, only maimed bad enough that they'd have a storyline excuse for him to not wrestle. All those people who watched David Flair's stuntman take the same hit 2 weeks ago on WCW and him come back without even a scratch a few days later while Austin will be out for months must think David Flair is the toughest sob in all of pro wrestling. Vince left with Austin to the hospital, so therefore he couldn't ref the main event. 7. China, Johnny Lauer, pinned Chris Jericho, Chris Irvine, to retain the IC title in 13:45. Simply put, China looked horrible and was totally exposed when trying to do an actual long singles wrestling match without the use of copious amounts of furniture to camouflage the work. Jericho worked real hard, actually so did China, but it was major style clash. Actually that's not true because that would require China to actually have a style. It was so bad in the beginning it actually made it good at the end. There was a funny spot where Jericho did the low kick and China no-sold it. China threw forearms over and over. That looked so bad. After one sequence, the crowd, not all of them, but the majority and most of the males, turned on her. When Jericho came back, he got heavily cheered. What a concept. Make almost all your moves look bad to get the crowd to turn on the babyface, then switch roles in midstream and have heat the rest of the way. Not that simple, because they didn't switch roles, as Jericho still tried to use heel psychology and avoid getting cheered, but it wasn't to be. Jericho kissed Miss Kitty. The fans cheered. Ross started comparing this match to Holyfield and Lewis, which was a pretty bad idea if you'd watched both shows because this match made Holyfield and Lewis seem like Misawa and Kobashi. There was a huge pop when Jericho powerbombed her, but he missed the lionsault. China threw some horrible-looking kicks eliciting more boos. Actually, you could hear a very distinct light feminine cheers for China, almost out of sympathy because of the way the crowd turned on her. But because of this, the heat got pretty good 11 minutes in. After a ref bump, Jericho hit China with the belt, but China kicked out. China did the pedigree. Jericho kicked out. China went for a Hurricane Rana in a slow mechanical as opposed to a smooth motion, and Jericho turned it into a Boston Crab, Walls of Jericho, whatever, and they had a really good rope break spot. Except, the fans booed heavily because they wanted China to tap out. China finally hit a terrible-looking low blow, followed by a terrible-looking pedigree off the top. Admittedly, that wouldn't be the easiest move to pull off, for the pin. Maybe the office will see the fact the last 3 minutes had heat and not realize it's because China was exposed, but enough fans didn't catch it, creating a divisiveness of crowd which makes often for the best heat possible, and think it's because Jericho is so popular and give him a push. But then if they misread that, they'll think he's a face and they'll ruin everything by turning him too soon. 1 star. 8. The Hardcore Hollies, Robert Howard and Aaron O'Grady, and Too Cool, Brian Christopher and Scott Taylor, beat Christian, Jay Resso and Edge, Adam Copeland, and Matt and Jeff Hardy in 14:26. This was a good match, pretty well destroyed by zero heat. They weren't given any favors coming after the audience was told Austin wasn't going to appear. But it was also clear whatever goodwill the Hardys and C&E had earned from their classic match just a few weeks back was already forgotten. They did a series of spectacular high-risk moves early, with Matt using a pescado on Crash, Christopher doing a sunset flip powerbomb over the top on Matt, Christian doing a leap into a plancha on both, Taylor doing a rolling body block off the apron, and climaxing with Jeff being backdropped over the top rope by Bob into a flip dive on all of the above. Edge speared Bob, Crash and Christopher and then accidentally speared Matt. Bob then pinned Edge after a roll-up in 606. Taylor pinned Matt after doing a leap off the top rope into a DDT, which is a difficult move that looked actually worse in execution than a Rick Steiner Bulldog in 622. Should mention that Christopher and Taylor are called Grandmaster Sex 8 and Scotty 2 Hottie. Jeff, who is a lot better than Shawn Michaels, was at the same stage of his career, pinned Taylor after a Firebird splash in 10-11. For some reason, it appeared Ross and Lawler's working annoyance with each other was getting a little too real as this match went on. Christopher pinned Jeff after a leg drop off the top in 11:34 after a missile dropkick. Christian pinned Christopher in 11:45 with a reverse DDT. Christian then pinned Crash with a Tomahawk, or I guess, now a Maritato in 13:58. Why don't they just call it a Resso or better yet, a couch? This left Bob versus Christian, with Bob getting the pin after blocking a Rana and sitting down on him for the pin. This was one of those rare matches that is actually tons better if you watch it with the sound off, because you're not influenced by the fact the crowd wasn't making any noise for all this hard work. 3 stars. 9. New Age Outlaws, Brian James and Monty Sup, retained the WWF Tag Titles beating Al Snow, Alan Sarvin, and Mankind, Mick Foley, in 13:59. It was real sad to see Snow getting pounded on, and Mankind in the corner clapping to get the crowd going, and nothing happened. There was also a funny spot where the ref got in the way and hit, but didn't go down because it wasn't supposed to be a ref bump. They all hit their moves. This was another match that would have been better if the crowd reacted. Mankind kicked out of Gunn's Famouser. Mankind used a double-arm DDT on Gunn while Snow used the snowplow on Dog. Mankind pulled out Mr. Sacco and got the claw on both guys, but they both low-blowed him. That spot got some heat. Snow hit Gunn with a mannequin head, but Gunn kicked out of Mankind's pin. Finally, the Outlaws gave Mankind a spike pile driver and Gunn pinned him. 1.25 stars. 10. Big Show won the WWF Heavyweight title in a 3-way over Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Paul Levesque, and Rock, Dwayne Johnson, in 16:15. They had no heat in the ring, but crowd got into it when they brawled in the entranceway. Triple H was body slammed through a table which woke the crowd up. Rock hit Show with a fire extinguisher and later with a ring bell. Rock and Triple H double suplex Show through the Spanish announcer's table, allowing them to do some decent wrestling in the ring. Didn't take long for Rock to clothesline Earl Hebner, taking him out. Rock tried a rock bottom and Triple H tried a pedigree, but both were blocked. Rock then hit the rock bottom but no ref. Shane McMahon ran in wearing a ref shirt, but Triple H kicked out. Rock delivered another rock bottom, but Show pulled Shane out of the ring, stopping the count. Show threw Rock through the ring steps, allowing Triple H to give Shane the pedigree. Rock hit a DDT on Triple H, but then DX came out to attack Rock. Vince showed up looking stern to save the day. He hit Triple H with the belt, missing the first time as a tease, connecting the second. Show then chokeslammed Triple H and got the pin. 2.5 stars. The UFC Japan show, which airs November 19th in the US on satellite systems as a pay-per-view, does not appear to have been a business success. The show drew about 3,600 fans. The 5,215 figure listed was a work to the 7,000-seat NK Hall, and much of that was paper. Randleman, a former 2-time NCAA champion who is generally considered to have been robbed of the heavyweight title in losing a controversial decision to Boss Rutan earlier this year, survived a first-round knockdown to win the final 4 rounds, beating Pete Williams of Lions Den in a match generally considered boring. Pedro Rizzo of Brazil, who had both Rutan and Marco Ruiz in his corner, became the UFC's top heavyweight contender, beating Japan's Tsuyoshi Kosaka with a 3rd-round knockout. It was not a good night for Pancrase, as both its fighters, Jason DeLucia and Kei Yamamiya, ranked numbers 3 and 4 contenders for the King of Pancrase title in the latest ratings, suffered conclusive defeats, with DeLucia blowing out his knee in the process. Another former pro wrestler, Kenichi Yamamoto, won a controversial 4-man Japanese tournament and the $10,000 first prize. The poor attendance figure was because neither Randleman nor Williams meant anything to the Japanese general public in the main event, and Kosaka on his own couldn't carry the card from a drawing perspective. Even though Kosaka may be Japan's best real heavyweight fighter, it would be either Kosaka or Enson Inoue. Combined with being a great pro wrestler, he just isn't a draw. Because it involved fighters from different weight classes, the 4-man Japanese tournament was declared as being unsanctioned by the UFC's own Mixed Martial Arts Council headed by Jeff Blatnick. It makes UFC look strange in presenting a pay-per-view show with the UFC name, although UFC had very little to do with the show other than providing the top 2 matches, with matches not sanctioned by its own in-house organization. The show was more notable when it came to seconds at ringside, which would make up an MMA all-star team, as compared to the name value of the fighters who competed. Besides Roos and Rutan, those would include Ken Shamrock, Mark Coleman, Masakatsu Funaki, Inoue, Maurice Smith, and Masaaki Sadake. The show airs as an American pay-per-view on November 19th. Blatnick and Mike Goldberg weren't brought to Japan for the show and were scheduled to do voiceover work early this week when the tape was brought back. Both were going to steadfastly avoid any contact with anyone who would have the results so as to commentate as if having no knowledge of what happened until they see it. The show was also scheduled for an edited and delayed 1-hour show on TV Tokyo in Japan later this month. 1. In the tournament, Katsuhisa Fuji, an amateur wrestling champion, knocked out Masatatsu Yano in 3:12 of the second round after a kick and punch combination knockdown. There was some speculation the stoppage may have been slightly quick. 2. In the other tournament first round match, Yamamoto beat Daiyu Takase, who was probably outweighed by some 30 pounds, winning a boring unanimous decision as Takase basically couldn't do anything and hung on. 3. Eugene Jackson knocked out Kei Yamamiya, formerly Keiichiro Yamamiya, of Pancrase in 3:12 of the third round in a match that was fought almost entirely standing and was said to have been the best match on the show. Jackson, going in with a bad knee, had the strategy of refusing to allow Yamamiya to take him down, and had enough wrestling ability to do so, and kept it standing, where he was the stronger of the two. 4. Joe Slick, an unknown Extreme Challenge fighter, defeated Pancrase's number 3 ranked fighter Jason DeLucia in 1:27. Pancrase was very careful in protecting DeLucia, turning down numerous suggested opponents until agreeing to an unknown fighter trained by Pat Militic. Slick scored a high takedown of DeLucia off a bear hug, and in doing so, DeLucia tore out his right knee ligaments in what was described as almost Theismanesque. DeLucia was screaming in pain and his corner threw in the towel. It was the same leg that was injured twice in the past against Takaku Fuke and later broken in a King of Pancrase title match where he lost to Masakatsu Funaki. 5. In the tournament finals, Yamamoto beat Fuji in 4:14 of the second round with a knee-lock submission. After the match, Yamamoto, who was with the Rings organization before retiring due to head injuries and before the UWFI and Kingdom, as well as having worked for New Japan and various indie pro wrestling companies as part of the Golden Cups with Anjo and current All Japan wrestler Yoshihiro Takayama, issued a challenge to Rings World Heavyweight Champion Kiyoshi Tamura after his win. 6. Pedro Hitso of Brazil remained unbeaten in MMA with a knockout of Kosaka in 1:12 of the third round. Kosaka wasn't able to take Hitso down, and paid the price against the skilled kickboxer, who destroyed his leg with ferocious low kicks in what was said to have been a very exciting match. A flurry of punches put Kosaka down and the match was stopped. Kosaka appears to be paying the price for fighting such a difficult schedule this year and has been racked with injuries in the process. 7. Randleman captured the vacant UFC heavyweight title beating Williams via unanimous decision after going the 25 minutes time limit. Williams dominated the first round, including knocking Randleman down and mounting him and throw-in punches just before the bell to end the round. There are reports that Randleman was saved by the bell. However, Williams got tired and Randleman dominated the last 4 rounds, largely taking Williams down and holding him there and keeping busy punching Williams while caught in the guard. Aside from the previously written about life and death of Owen Hart special which aired November 16 on A&E, the station as part of a week-long sweeps period doing biographies on pro wrestlers produced 2 other first-runs features on Steve Austin and Mick Foley. In addition, a highly anticipated local special aired on November 6 in St. Louis revisiting the popular Wrestling at the Chase television show promoted by Sam Mushnick. The biggest merchandise-selling pro wrestler in history, Austin, was profiled in a piece entitled Lord of the Ring. The piece, which featured interviews with his mother, stepfather and sister, talked about almost a prototype all-American boy jock with almost actor-like looks who transformed himself into a bad boy pop culture icon. Much of the history in this piece was covered in the Rolling Stone article on Austin, but unlike so many mainstream media pieces, it was both accurate both in its history and its perspective of pro wrestling's current top draw. Austin, who was extremely muscular for a high school student, was a star football player and discus thrower for Etna High School, where he was described as a shy but popular student. He ended up marrying his high school sweetheart while early in his wrestling career, but they divorced after 1 year. He was working at a loading dock when he got the urge to attend a wrestling school, where he claimed he didn't learn very much, but it got his foot in the door. For whatever reason, the piece mentioned very few names of wrestlers, even in instances where it seemed obvious omissions not to, such as naming Owen Hart as the wrestler who injured his neck, Chris Adams as the wrestler who ran the wrestling school he first went to, or Shawn Michaels as the wrestler he won the WWF title from. Aside from Vince McMahon, the only wrestlers interviewed were Michael Hayes and Jerry Lawler, to provide perspective on his early years working the Texas and Tennessee areas, and Dwayne Johnson and Mick Foley, who actually saw him first training at Adams School and was in Texas when he broke in, and later worked with him in WCW before both became superstars over the past few years, as his WWF peers at the top of the food chain. It talked about his early days making no money, sometimes as low as $100 per week, in Tennessee, starving to death on what he called the Nutrisystem circuit, since everyone who worked there lost weight. He noted while working in Tennessee he got the name Steve Austin, taken from the character on the $6 Million Man TV show from the 70s. It didn't mention that he was given the name change because there was already a major wrestling star who had the same real name of Steve Williams. His WCW career was talked about having signed for $75,000, given a raise to the $150,000 range, and forming a tag team with Brian Pillman. It noted he was fired while being out of action with a torn tricep suffered while on tour of Japan. As is well known, his WCW tenure ended after Eric Bischoff fired him because he felt Austin, while a good wrestler, wasn't marketable, in what will no doubt go down in wrestling history as the single biggest bonehead personnel move ever made. It portrayed his career options at that point more negative than they were, basically saying a small group called ECW saved his career by giving him a chance, when the reality was that everyone in wrestling with half a brain knew he was destined to be a top star. Nobody probably could have guessed he'd wind up as big as he did, but many in the early 90s had him pegged as being the next Ric Flair or the next Ted DiBiase. ECW didn't take this out-of-work wrestler and save his career. He did ECW a favor to grace them with his star power for a short period of time before the inevitable happened and the WWF went calling. The show went on to talk about his flopping with the ringmaster gimmick, and his WWF career appearing en route to be a huge disappointment until he and his wife at the time came up with the Stone Cold Steve Austin gimmick, and credited the angle where he got the rub from Mike Tyson and a later angle with Vince McMahon for taking him over the top. They noted how hard he works on designing his own merchandise. There was the subtle WWF manipulation, such as the talk about Raw having strong ratings of males 18 to 34, to give the impression it's adult entertainment, even though its highest ratings are actually drawn in the teenager, particularly male teen demographic. The TV-14 logo appeared on all the clips, during a period when Raw actually was not rated TV-14. In the Foley special, the WWF even patched on a TV-14 logo on the clips of Jimmy Snuka from 16 years ago, which is somewhat disingenuous. In that vein, it showed not only his mother, but his sister and even himself talking about having problems with aspects of the product he stars in. His mother and sister didn't like some of the antics he displays, such as the foul language, emphasizing that he's nothing like his character. Austin himself said he doesn't like the heavy emphasis on Tanda, saying it's a turnoff for him. Probably the highest compliment that can be given, in this business so ego-driven, is that he himself has kept his stardom largely in perspective, knowing it's a relatively short ride and enjoying the ride while it lasts. And while this wasn't brought up in the story, he also trusts few if anyone to decide what's best for him and his character. St. Louis Wrestling, the mythical wrestling capital of the world in the 60s and 70s under Sam Mushnick, was revisited in a KPLR TV special called Wrestling at the Chase, a look back, on November 6th. The show drew tremendous local media interest, probably because the people in power in the local newspapers, TV stations and radio were of the age that they grew up with Sunday mornings watching wrestling, which in that market, ruled the NFL evenly for TV ratings points. The one-hour show was produced by Randy Liebler and Tom Zupancy of KPLR TV with help from longtime wrestling announcer and promotional assistant Larry Matuzik, Mushnick's right-hand man during the final era of the show, which ran on the station from 1959 to 1984. From press clips, it was clear the show was a huge ratings hit, but it was in a day when ratings weren't the be-all and end-all of promoting wrestling. Very few tapes of the show are still in existence, so the show contained tapes only from the 1979 to 1983 era, mainly videotapes Matuzik had kept himself when he got a VCR, along with one old 2-inch tape from 1962. The original announcer, Joe Garagiola, was given by Mushnick when he left his job as wrestling announcer as a gift to seek what turned out to be fame and fortune as one of the most famous television personalities in the country during the 70s as a host of the Today Show alongside Hugh Downs and Barbara Walters every morning. The show talked about the TV show through 1970 with a touch that was unique to the city, with the wrestling show being taped in the most exclusive hotel ballroom in the city, the Corson Room at the Chase Hotel. It remained in the Chase Hotel for the rest of its run, but moved to a TV studio for KPLR TV, and the atmosphere at that point became more like most of the studio wrestling shows that were popular in that era. The only clip perhaps still remaining of wrestling from the famed Coruscant Room era so fondly talked about was amazing. A packed house, in a 900-seat dinner theater, of a crowd that looked like they were seeing opera and not pro wrestling. Almost exclusively couples, despite the tapings actually being done on Sunday afternoons, all the men in suits and ties, some in tuxedos and women in evening gowns, at dinner tables with the big chandeliers on the ceiling, sipping champagne while watching a pro wrestling television taping. The existence of the clip destroys virtually every media stereotype about what wrestling was, and what wrestling fans were, during those supposed dark days of wrestling in the early 60s. This was not what pro wrestling was anywhere else in those days, although in some markets where wrestling was particularly over during that time period, it wasn't unusual to see men in suits and ties throughout the crowd, a point made clear by the wrestlers as to why everyone wanted to work St. Louis, and why it was considered the wrestling capital of the world at the time. And there is almost no resemblance of that product to what it is today. The show featured clips of men who had runs in the 70s as local television stars on The Wrestling Show, announcers Matuzik and Mickey Garagiola, now in their 50s and still recognized by strangers regularly from the good old days, local referees Lee Warren and Joe Schoenberger, and interviews from wrestlers Harley Race, Luthez, who looks a good 25 years younger than his actual 83 years of age, and Ted DiBiase, with fond memories of the last place in the United States where pro wrestling actually almost looked like and was promoted and treated like every other major sport, with a few touches of showmanship and entertainment thrown in, playing before an audience considered the most respectful to the product in North America. The closest thing modern to compare it with would be All Japan at Budokan Hall. When looking back at clips that were 16 to 20 years old, the most notable difference between that wrestling, which was top of the line in its period, and now, are the bodies. Steroids were already around in wrestling for more than a decade by that point, and were not exactly a rarity, but clearly their usage today is tenfold or 100-fold what it was then. Even Ken Patera, who was an Olympic weightlifter who had to be far stronger at that point than just about any pro wrestler active today, and had at the time one of the best physiques in wrestling, and who took steroids, in very small doses compared with today's wrestlers, doesn't even look all that physically impressive when compared with the HGH and insulin-fed monsters of this era. Memories often romanticize the past, and sometimes videotape reality can be a cruel blow. The athletics in the ring really was no better than today. Many of today's wrestlers are, besides being obviously more muscular, are also quicker and more agile. The in-ring product was more solid and believable, but didn't have today's spectacular moves. It was just done in a more serious setting. While people like Bruiser Brody, Ric Flair, DiBiase, Dick Murdoch, Gene Kiniski and Race would rank with the best performers today, only the former two had a look that would transcend eras that would have given them a shot even being pushed in today's cosmetic-based environment, which is almost the ignored sad fact you're left with after watching the show. DiBiase, a tremendous worker, would probably be dismissed as too skinny, although he was good enough in the ring and tall enough that he could have had a chance today if he fell into the right clique, and perhaps if he was around today and taking the same physique-enhancing combinations today's wrestlers are, while his genetics still wouldn't give him the perfect look, he'd have at least been presentable to where his work and talking ability could carry him to the top. If he didn't have the right friends, he also may have been stuck as a much taller Eddie Guerrero. David Von Erich, a huge local draw, was even skinnier, a lot skinnier than even Kendall Windham. Race and Murdoch would be dismissed as having too big a belly and not having the star look. Kiniski would be considered, even by WCW standards, as being too old. And Dick the Bruiser at the end looked positively ancient, making today's Flair and Hogan look young. Yet they drew sellouts when matched against each other. Joe Garagiola, who was a St. Louis Cardinals catcher of modest ability, got his first broadcasting job as Mushnick's wrestling announcer, but he was by no means a good wrestling announcer. The respect he had for Mushnick and fond remembrances of what some in the mainstream would feel is a part of his career that should be an embarrassment. A famous national broadcaster who started as a local wrestling announcer, were obvious in his interview as he was almost teary-eyed remembering Mushnick and being involved with a local hit TV show. In fact, he jumped at the chance to come in from Phoenix to do the special, just as it was with everyone that appeared on the show, including Bob Costas, who grew up as a fan of Mushnick's version of wrestling, even if he really didn't seem to grasp exactly what it was. Matuzik, who hosted the show, was considered one of the best announcers of that era, in that Gordon Solie-esque way of broadcasting things seriously, like it was a sports event. While the bodies couldn't compare, in contrast when it comes to crowd heat and certainly emotion, today's product can't compare. When DiBiase pinned Race in a television tag team match, everyone in the audience was going crazy, jumping up and down in a manner never seen today except when Misawa scores the pin to end a Budokan show after going 30 minutes. There are sometimes bigger pops today, like when finally The Rock has returned to Cleveland, but they are more contrived by a business far more sophisticated in its manipulative abilities, and often devoid of any true emotion. They built the show largely around that tag match, which catapulted DiBiase into national stardom, having scored a pinfall on the world champion, much as Flair was catapulted into national stardom in the same city when he first pinned Dory Funk Jr. in a St. Louis main event. Mickey Garagiola, the ring announcer, and Joe's younger brother, was so excited, having seen what he called the greatest match of his life. It really today looked no different from any very good match today except for the level of intensity in the crowd, hanging on every move at the end, climaxing with such an impressive crowd pop for the finish of DiBiase, winning with a move now called a German suplex, that it would confuse people as to why unless they understood the context it was put into. They fans popped because the win meant something tangible, and not because the music was blaring so loudly in the background. There were no musical introductions in those days, and he was doing a dance in the ring. And at the count of 2 with the champ on his back, nobody turned sideways to look away from the ring and see who was doing the run-in. Garagiola, in the emotion, in his most embarrassing moment in wrestling, announced DiBiase as the winner and new world champion. He forgot that there was no way on earth the world title could change hands in a tag team match. Of course, today it could. And there was the sense of first-take realism, even in a taped show. During an angle when then world champion Ric Flair was building up a match with Butch Reed in street clothes, was challenged by Flair to an amateur wrestling confrontation. If you've ever seen the angle, you'd know in your sleep how it went. Reed embarrasses the world champion, who can't escape his ride, then easily escapes the champ's ride, and the champ, with the challenger in the down position for the second time, double-crosses him by putting the boots to him. Challenger comes back doing pro style and does a move while the ref counts 3 in a non-sanctioned match. But this was different. Reed, in street clothes, ripped his pants at the start of the angle. The sequence continued unabated, with nobody mentioning the obvious, nor for that matter, even one fan laughing at what today would be remembered as an impromptu comedic classic moment. If it had been brought up and turned into comedy, it would have resulted in killing the house at the arena show this angle was designed to build. But fans were more into seeing Reed embarrass the world champion, and his ripping his pants in the process was immaterial. Oh yeah, the house wasn't killed either. It was also interesting to see Joyce Grable execute a move now called a power bomb, Debbie Combs use a move now called a Rana, a very ordinary-looking Wendy Richter in her first professional match, and just plain women who looked like housewives out there wrestling. It wasn't particularly good wrestling even then, but obviously it was at a level far above what passes for mainstream women's wrestling today. The lack of clips is just a testimonial to the fact that as popular as wrestling was in those days, nobody had the foresight to see someday these tapes would also be valuable, and the originals were all erased decades ago to save space in a storage room. The opening still photo montage and the respect everyone had for Mushnick, not just as a great wrestling promoter but as an honest man, was a clip that current promoters could commission and contrive and probably get on A&E or somewhere else when they get old, but none could ever get naturally, were the highlight. The reminiscence of, in particular, Race and Mickey Garagiola, of their days in the sun, when everyone knew them in town and they were real celebrities, were the most charming. The disappointment was we didn't see more of the stars of that day. A staggering percentage are dead: David, Fritz, and Kerry Von Erich. John Studd, who looked so much smaller and had a little bit of agility, he was only slightly larger than DiBiase in a singles match, as compared to the stationary giant who made DiBiase look tiny that he played when putting the big lifts in his ring boots feuding with Andre in the WWF. Murdoch, Blackwell, Bruiser, Bob Brown, O'Connor and Brody among others, only a few of whom lived long enough to actually retire from wrestling. Because of this, a decision was made not to mention just how many had died young because it would have overwhelmed the show, although they did make mention of the early deaths of Brody and David Von Erich. But it was missing people like Dory Funk Jr. Flair, who according to an article in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch stiffed assistant producer and researcher Randy Liebler for an interview, Gene Kiniski and Johnny Valentine today to make it complete. Costas was the only one to offer a comparison with the modern McMahon product, talking about Mushnick promoting good versus evil, and good always winning out and people leaving happy, which was funny since, while Mushnick did a babyfaces and heels, the line wasn't nearly as strong nor were the personalities so overplayed as in every other promotion in the country at the time. Mushnick's babyfaces and heels were more like home and visiting team baseball players as opposed to soap opera-based characters playing symbolic roles. Matuzik noted that the style they promoted never truly died, as it was still drawing sellouts and big television ratings when Mushnick retired as promoter in 1982. Actually, the true history was that the group which bought the promotion from Mushnick in 1982 tried to modernize it and make it more like the wrestling in the rest of the country, and by doing so, largely killed what made it so popular, and it started struggling until McMahon came in and bought the established time slot away from them. St. Louis was the first major city to be the site of the full-scale all-out war, with one side giving people Flair versus Brody and Flair versus Kerry on one side, and the other side with Hogan on top with Andre. Both companies were doing big business. But it didn't take long before that ended, and soon nobody could draw in the market. Eventually, the modern concepts took hold and whatever was hot everywhere else, or not hot, was the same in St. Louis. Costas asked viewers to look at the show and decide which version of wrestling was better. For a modern fan who wasn't around in the 70s or 80s, to see these clips, they'd recognize clearly by the talk of people on the show it was a very special period in their life. But because the atmosphere looked so primitive in comparison with the full-blown stage productions of today, the truth is, without understanding the context it was presented in, they would also probably have a difficult time quite understanding why. The Mick Foley feature, entitled Madman Unmasked, was somewhat disappointing. If you've read the book, the TV show comes off as too simplistic and almost a piece commissioned by the WWF, as it goes straight from college and wrestling training with only a passing interest in the 8-year period in between that and his Mankind character. There is virtually no time spent in examining the question of what his long-term future is, with only close friend and filmmaker Barry Blaustein giving a possible hint when noting he's 34 years old and can't get down on his knees to play with his kids. The history is disappointing, particularly placing a clip of a mid-90s Japan match with Terry Funk as being in 1987 and claiming his matches in Japan got him noticed and made his name for his early US bookings. It was done in too much of a boy makes good mode, that he struggled. And then one day, Vince McMahon noticed, and he became a star, when the reality of him sending annual resumes into the WWF and constantly being dismissed because McMahon wasn't impressed by his physique and didn't think he had star qualities, until Jim Ross got power and pushed hard enough during a period when business was down far enough that they were willing to give him a shot. His WCW tenure, including their stupidity in not exploiting some great opportunities, not to mention some classic main event pay-per-view matches, all didn't exist. While his Hell in the Cell match is this generation's cult classic American wrestling match, it was totally overplayed. Foley, while liking the notoriety it has given him, has many times stated he didn't think it was close to the best match he ever had. This piece gives the impression Foley said it was the greatest match he ever had, and even the narration giving the impression it was the greatest match ever held in the history of wrestling, even if Foley really didn't remember most of it when it was over. With the exception of Blaustein and some charming early days talk from his wrestling trainer Dominic DeNucci about all the sacrifices he made getting into pro wrestling, none of the wrestling people interviewed added much except talking about how hard he worked to entertain the fans. Austin praised him for that, but seemed his only purpose for being on there was because he was Austin. Rock even more so because he said even less. Undertaker, for the first time out of character and listed as Mark Calloway, seemed uncomfortable in the position he was put in. McMahon was spewing almost a WWF storyline about Foley's tenure in the company, without the slightest bit of even thought as to the long-term results of what Foley did, other than say that he'd never let anyone do what Foley did in that Hell in the Cell match again. But even that came off as contrived. There was mention, but no insight with his family, nor of wrestling and his career, which is what made the Beyond the Mat movie that he was such a big part so strong. This is a far more interesting individual, who has tremendous insight into the profession he works, to be portrayed so simply as a guy whose main claim to fame is that he allowed himself to be thrown off a cage one night. Maybe if you've never read the book, and for people who haven't seen the movie, or didn't see the stories about his childhood in the series on Raw that turned him babyface in the WWF and created Dude Love on a national stage, this biopiece would be interesting. But if you've read or seen any of the above, let alone all of the above, and actually followed his career, it comes off as very shallow. Another of the legends of not only Mexican wrestling, but the Mexican movie world as well, Wolfgang Rubinsky's Wolf Rubinsky, passed away on November 9 due to heart failure at the age of 78. Rubinsky's health had its ups and downs since suffering a minor stroke in 1983. He followed with a serious bout with high blood pressure in 1986 and a major heart attack needing triple bypass surgery in 1990. He had been hospitalized for the past 3 weeks in Mexico City and his health had slowly failed since undergoing heart surgery a few weeks ago. To show just how well known he was, the story of his death was front-page news in many newspapers. It led off the entertainment news in the papers that didn't put it on the front page. This was the second most widely covered story having to do with pro wrestling in Mexico during the decade of the 1990s. The pro wrestling strike in 1991, because it got several weeks' worth of coverage, would have been the biggest mainstream news story of the decade in Mexico. He was one of the country's most famous heels, but he was more famous as an actor than as a wrestler. His ring career in the ring spanned from 1945 to 1972 and included a period as a star in the United States. He had been wrestling a few years and was already a main eventer when drafted into the movies because of his matinee idol looks, playing the lead in Mexican production of Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire in 1948. He had at least 8 leading roles in the theater after that point. He almost always played a heel in the wrestling ring, with the idea, which turned out to be correct, that it would be easy for Mexicans to hate a good-looking Russian Jew. A Mexican comedy actor named German Valdez was looking to copy the success of movie serials and westerns in the U.S. at that time, and saw Ruvinski's on stage and hired him to be a recurring villain lead in several movies, including roles where he played a wrestler and a boxer. Bigger-name producers saw him in the boxing role, which led to him starring in a famous Mexican movie about boxing called Pepe el Toro, and him co-starring with Mexico's biggest movie star ever, Pedro Infante, again playing a boxer in La Oveja Negra. In later years, when the B-lucha flicks were all the rage, he was a main villain in movies starring the likes of El Santo, Blue Demon, Rayo de Jalisco, and Mil Mascaras, frequently playing the role of Neutron. He appeared in more than 150 movies in total between 1949 and 1996. Born on October 30, 1921 in a country then known as Latvia, which later became part of the Soviet Union, his family moved when he was a baby to Argentina to escape Lenin's annexation of Latvia into the USSR. His father died shortly after they arrived in Argentina from tuberculosis, with the thinking being that the trip killed him. His mother spoke no Spanish, so he and his brothers from the age of 7 worked the streets of Argentina as beggars for money. In his adult years, Rubinsky openly admitted to undergoing therapy for more than 25 years because of the continued nightmares of his childhood. Later, after he became rich and famous, he noted the irony about being a teenager with no money, hanging out with his friends on the beach and feeling sorry for himself, wishing only to have some money. Years later, when he was rich and famous, he realized he had good friends and had nothing but fun, and that was the best period of his life. He wound up getting into both boxing and wrestling in Argentina. In 1938, he won a national championship in Greco-Roman wrestling and played on a second-division soccer team in Argentina as a goalkeeper. He was good enough to be given an offer by a first-division team in Colombia in 1944, where he played while still living in Argentina. He left Argentina for Mexico in 1945 when the German Nazis, with the cooperation of the government of Argentina, took over. With the Nazis getting into power, Ruvinskis, as a Russian Jew, most likely fled the country out of fear for his safety. When arriving in Mexico, the first job he got was as a pro wrestler, masquerading as a Mexican using the name Guillermo Lopez, wearing a sombrero and serape. Within a year, he became a main eventer. He was quickly booked into Texas and became a big star there as well. Over the next year, he wrestled under names such as Boris Wolf, Boris Boy, Van Kaduk, and Peter Cortes. In the 1960s, he did movies in both Argentina and Spain. In all, he worked in more than 150 movies, generally in minor roles, and won numerous Lifetime Movie Achievement Awards. By the 1990s, he and his fourth wife, Lilia Michelle, a retired famous actress, were working doing magic seances in Mexico City and were part owners of 2 Argentinian food restaurants in Mexico City and also had just opened a currency exchange store in Mexico City. He returned to pro wrestling after a 21-year absence in 1993 to become the head of the Distrito Federal's Boxing and Wrestling Commission. After problems with a previous commissioner, of course the wrestling offices wanted him to play more of a figurehead role, which he refused to do. He proved to be more hard-headed than a conciliatory figure that the wrestling commissioner needed to be and didn't do well handling the delicate paranoid egos. His reign was considered a major disaster and led to him being replaced. Anthony Maliaro, better known in wrestling as Tony Rumble, the Boston Bad Boy, the owner of the NWA New England promotion, and one of the most successful independent promoters in the country, passed away from an apparent massive heart attack at his home in Revere, Massachusetts on November 13. Maliaro, 43, not only owned and booked his promotion, which was also known as the Century Wrestling Alliance, which ran a 6-state region, but sometimes wrestled and managed on the shows as well, and the past had also served as a television announcer as well as editing television shows. He had been complaining to his wife about having indigestion for a few days. On Saturday morning, he complained to his wife again as he began sweating profusely while watching a football game and asked his wife to call an ambulance to take him to the hospital. He suffered a massive heart attack in the hospital and died. Sheldon Goldberg, who worked with him in the wrestling company and was one of his closest friends, said that both his parents died relatively young, also from heart problems, and that he didn't have the outside-the-ring problems associated with so many of the early wrestling deaths. His wake was on November 16 in Melrose, Massachusetts. His wife requested that he be buried wearing his trademark Boston bad boy do-rag. He left a daughter from a previous marriage, a stepdaughter, and one grandson. A lifelong wrestling fan dating back to a 1965 match where Bruno Sammartino wrestled Gorilla Monsoon at the Boston Garden and the ring collapsed, which in those days was not a pre-planned gimmick. He first got involved in wrestling in 1983 with Angelo Savoldi's independent promotion that ran in the area. He was more a personality than a good wrestler, whose best attribute was his talking and getting heel heat. He was a real student of the business, said Goldberg. He read everything he could about wrestling. He was never bored by it and always enthused about it. Outside of New England, Rumble would best be known for his appearance in March on the ESPN Outside the Lines special on pro wrestling. Rumble's promotion was featured when giving a backstage glimpse of how pro wrestling angles are set up. The segment showed a mock booking meeting where Rumble, Goldberg, and Pat Doyle would book angles and finishes, showed him giving those orders to the wrestlers at the show, and showed them practicing their spots, and then followed them into the ring at a show in Southbridge, Connecticut doing their planned spots, angles, and finishes. That actually drew him the most heat of anything he did in wrestling because the special, which was probably the single best mainstream journalistic look at the business during the current boom period, talked about wrestling's two remaining secrets, its steroid and drug problems and their contribution to the nothing short of staggering early death rate in the profession. His promotion wasn't even part of that aspect of the show where those issues, and the current product issues, were discussed. But even with kayfabe largely a thing of the past, some within the business were unhappy how angles were set up and that the role of the referee in the show and actually seeing people on camera doing booking and practicing moves and finishes aired on a nationally televised show. Actually, most of what occurred on that program was staged for ESPN, as Rumble actually never did booking meetings the likes of which aired on the show. He was personally happy with his segment, which was the segment that wrestling came across most positively. Rumble broke into wrestling in 1983 working for Angelo Savoldi's International Championship Wrestling, which was later called International World Class Championship Wrestling, having his first match without any formal training experience. Because of his ability to talk, he eventually ended up announcing and editing the television show for the promotion, which preceded his, as a small-time company in the New England market. He started the Century Wrestling Alliance in 1993, named after the local Century Buick dealership which sponsored some of his early shows, although he had promoted shows intermittently dating back to 1989. He was good friends in particular with Jim Cornette, when he lived in the area and was working for the WWF, and Kevin Sullivan, which resulted in a lot of his wrestlers, most notable being Matt Bloom, Prince Albert, Steve Bradley, Rick Fuller and Lenny Lane getting looked at by the major companies. Through his connection with Sullivan, a lot of his wrestlers, including himself, worked as jobber talent on WCW television tapings when Sullivan booked the company. His pro wrestling idol was the late Bruiser Brody, who he met when both were working for Angelo Savoldi's International Championship Wrestling promotion in New England. Rumble's promotion continued to talk of Brody and occasionally air tapes of him long after everyone else had forgotten him, and his was the only television show in the country that mentioned the 10-year anniversary of his death in July 1998. Through his friendship with NWA President Howard Brody, he joined the group, renaming the promotion NWA New England. The company had grown over the past year, promoting roughly twice as many shows as the year before. Promoting and working in wrestling was his full-time occupation, a rarity for those not working for one of the major three companies. He was a strong proponent of the NWA concept, where the regional promoters would work together, although he frequently butted heads, occasionally publicly, with Brody regarding the direction of the NWA. He had been working on making a deal with WCW where they would use his promotion as a developmental territory for younger wrestlers, similar to how WWF uses the Power Pro and Ohio Valley companies, but the deal never came to fruition. He was also working on getting his company back on broadcast television locally. He had limited his wrestling the past few years and his managing, feeling he was more valuable running the show from backstage. Goldberg spoke to Rumble's wife Ellen, who said that she felt they should continue his wrestling company since it was Rumble's life's work. Balloting for the final Wrestling Observer Awards of this century starts after Thanksgiving. This will be our 20th annual awards, and they have traditionally been the only pro wrestling awards covered by wrestling media throughout the world. The time frame for these awards is December 1st, 1998 through November 30th, 1999. Anything taking place between those dates should be considered. Anything taking place before or after those dates shouldn't. Ballots will be accepted throughout the month of December, but please plan on mailing before Christmas for inclusion because holiday mail service is pretty bad. You can also fax or email awards in to us. The awards will be released in Observer in early January. If you've got an opinion on the awards, you're encouraged to send it in as quickly as possible for consideration in the letters section. Like last year, we need to clarify categories as to the term shooting. We have categories specifically for actual competitive matches: Shoot Fighter of the Year and Shoot Match of the Year. All UFC, Pride, MMA, Pancrase and legitimate rings, as opposed to worked rings, matches are eligible for the Shoot Awards. Consideration for Shoot Fighter of the Year should be based entirely on participation and results of legitimate matches during the time frame and nothing else. Performance in shoot matches can be taken into consideration if relevant for the Wrestler of the Year award, since that award encompasses the entire pro wrestling world. That top award is for overall excellence in whatever craft your company is presenting and value to the promotion over the past year. However, Most Outstanding Wrestler is an award for the best worker, which inherently means anything that takes place during a shoot match is ineligible. There are people who do worked and shoot matches and could qualify for this award, but in that case, only their worked matches should be considered. Best box office draw is self-explanatory: add and work versus shoot doesn't matter and anyone is eligible. Feud, tag team and most improved, since it's a working award, are all having to do with working and thus anything in a shoot shouldn't be taken into consideration. Best on interviews has nothing to do with working or shooting, although I can't imagine any non-workers being considered. Most charismatic is open to everyone. Best technical wrestler and Bruiser Brody award are meant within a worked environment, as are most overrated and most underrated. Best promotion is open to everyone. Best weekly TV is irrelevant to this discussion because at this point no shoot promotions have weekly TV. Match of the Year is open only to worked matches because shoot matches have their own category. It's unfair to compare one with the other. Rookie of the Year is open to anyone in the pro wrestling world as are TV announcers, and best and worst major cards, so shoot shows are eligible. The Shoot Award should only be for performers who did shooting matches this year, and not for people like Ken Shamrock who have in the past, but haven't this year. Category Awards. Pick a first, second and third place finisher in each category. Points will be awarded on a 5-3-2 basis. The winner of the award is determined by total points. 1. Wrestler of the Year. As mentioned, this category is open to all forms of pro wrestling. This is for a combination of being both an important and influential wrestler in a positive manner over the past year, combined with being a great performer in the ring during the same period. Last year's top 3 were Steve Austin, Mitsuharu Misawa, and Kenta Kobashi. 2. Most Outstanding Wrestler. This is based on ring work as the only criterion. Simply, the best 3 workers in the world inside the ring on a consistent basis over the past year. Drawing power, charisma and push shouldn't be considered. Last year's top 3 were Koji Kanemoto, Shinjiro Otani, and Mitsuharu Misawa. 3. Best box office draw, based on drawing power and drawing big houses and buy rates. Ring work shouldn't be considered. Last year's top 3 were Steve Austin, Bill Goldberg, and Hulk Hogan. 4. Feud of the Year. This should be based on a combination of having a compelling storyline along with having great matches on a consistent basis that strengthen the box office. Last year's top 3 were Steve Austin vs. Vince McMahon, Liger's Jr. vs. Otani's Jr. and NWO Black and White vs. Wolfpack. 5. Tag Team of the Year. For the best working regular tag team during the previous year. Last year's top 3 were Shinjiro Otani and Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Taue and the New Age Outlaws. 6. Most Improved. This is based on making the biggest strides in ring work over the balloting period. This is not for someone who has always had the ability but is being given their first push. Last year's top 3 were Rock, Billy Kidman and D'Lo Brown. 7. Best on Interviews. Who has given the best interviews on a consistent basis over the past year. Reputation from previous years shouldn't be taken into account. It should be based on work over the entire year rather than 1 or 2 great interviews. Last year's top 3 were Steve Austin, FOLEY, and Chris Jericho. 8. Most Charismatic. What wrestler has to do the least to get the most out of it? Last year's top 3 were Steve Austin, Rock, and Bill Goldberg. 9. Best Technical Wrestler, this is for having the ability to use high-level technical wrestling moves within the context of building a great, worked wrestling match. Last year's top 3 were Kiyoshi Tamura, Shinjiro Otani, and Dean Malenko. 10. Bruiser Brody Memorial Award, this is for the wrestler who uses brawling tactics to put together the best matches during the previous year. Last year's top 3 were Mick Foley, Chris Benoit, and Steve Austin. 11. Best Flying Wrestler, this is for the wrestler who does the most innovative and solidly executed flying maneuvers within the context of putting together great wrestling matches. This is not for simply the hottest daredevil moves. Last year's top 3 were Juventud Guerrera, Rey Mysterio Jr., and Hayabusa. 12. Most Overrated Wrestler, this is for the wrestler who gets the biggest push despite lacking in ring ability. Last year's top 3 were Hulk Hogan, Warrior, and Kevin Nash. 13. Most Underrated Wrestler, the wrestler with the most ability who, for whatever reason, doesn't get a push commensurate with their talent. This should be based on their work during the past year, not something based on a business reputation garnered years ago. Last year's top 3 were Chris Benoit, Taka Michinoku, and Psicosis. 14. Best Promotion should be based on which group puts together the best live and television product on a consistent basis, and secondarily, the ability to sell that product to a high level at the box office. Theoretically, the top pick should be a company at or near the top in both categories. Last year's top 3 were New Japan Pro Wrestling, World Wrestling Federation, and All Japan Pro Wrestling. 15. Best Weekly Television Show. Weekly television shows are the only ones eligible, not monthlies, specials or individual episodes of a specific program. This is for the best consistent program. Last year's top 3 were WWF Raw is War, New Japan World Pro Wrestling, and All Japan Pro Wrestling 30. 16. Match of the Year. Pick the 3 best matches, in order, from the time period listed. Please list date and location of the match. Last year's top 3 were Mitsuharu Misawa vs. Kenta Kobashi on October 31st in Tokyo, Undertaker vs. Mankind from June 28th in Pittsburgh, and Kiyoshi Tamura vs. Tsuyoshi Kosaka from June 27th in Yokohama. 17. Rookie of the Year. This is based on ring performance and not how someone is pushed. By the standards of the category, a rookie wrestler is someone who hasn't had a regular wrestling job with a company that runs shows or worked on a regular basis on the indie level before September 1, 1998. Last year's top 3 were Bill Goldberg, Dragon Kid, and Magnum Tokyo. 18. Best Non-Wrestler Performer, for the best performer on a television show who isn't a traditional wrestler. This is a new category, in a sense taking the spot of the Old Manager of the Year category, since old-style managers are almost passé in this form of wrestling. 19. Best Television Announcer. Last year's top 3 were Jim Ross, Mike Tenay, and Joey Styles. 20. Worst Television Announcer. Last year's top 3 were Lee Marshall, Tony Schiavone, and Shane McMahon. 21. Best Major Show of the Year. This should be a major show rather than a typical house show from the promotion. Last year's top 3 were ECW Heat Wave August 2nd Dayton, WWF WrestleMania March 29th Boston, and New Japan G1 Quarterfinals August 1st Tokyo. Category B Awards. Pick 1 in each category. Winners chosen on basis of first place votes. 1. Worst Major Show of the Year. WCW Fall Brawl September 13th Winston-Salem, last year's winner. 2. Best Wrestling Maneuver. Kenta Kobashi's Burning Hammer, last year's winner. 3. Most Disgusting Promotional Tactic. WCW exploiting Scott Hall's alcohol problems. 4. Reader's Personal Favorite Wrestler. Mick Foley, last year's winner. 5. Reader's Personal Least Favorite Wrestler. Hulk Hogan, last year's winner. 6. Worst Wrestler/Rookies Ineligible. Warrior, last year's winner. 7. Worst Tag Team. Kurgan and Golga, last year's winners. 8. Worst Weekly TV Show. WCW Nitro, last year's winner. 9. Worst Manager. Sonny Ono, last year's winner. 10. Worst Match of the Year. Hulk Hogan vs. Warrior, October 24th Las Vegas, last year's winner. 11. Worst Feud of the Year. Hulk Hogan vs. Warrior, last year's winner. 12. Worst on Interviews. Warrior, last year's winner. 13. Worst Promotion. World Championship Wrestling, last year's winner. 14. Best Booker. Vince McMahon, last year's winner. 15. Promoter of the Year. Vince McMahon, last year's winner. 16. Shoot Fighter of the Year. Frank Shamrock, last year's winner. 17. Shoot match of the year, Jerry Bullender vs. Kevin Jackson, March 13, New Orleans, last year's winner. 18. Best gimmick, Stone Cold Steve Austin, last year's winner. 19. Worst gimmick, Oddities, last year's winner. 20. Most embarrassing wrestler, Warrior, last year's winner. The combination of curiosity over Austin and coming the day after a pay-per-view with a title change sparked Raw to increase its margin of victory over Nitro on November 15 to more than 3 points. Considering the general reaction was that Nitro was the better show, largely because the crowd in Little Rock, which has never had a show of that caliber, was fresher and more enthusiastic than a flat Raw crowd in Pittsburgh, there was a lot of thought that this would be the week. The week where the Nitro ratings finally rise because of the addition of the new writers. For better or for worse, at all taste in what wrestling is or should be aside, Nitro will ultimately, without all the double talk that goes on in wrestling, be judged by the numbers moving. More work is being done on the show. In every way except the downplaying of the in-ring product, it is a faster moving and better show. But all press clippings aside, there is no indication yet of numbers moving. Raw did a 6.20 rating, 6.25 first hour, 6.15 seconds hour, and a 9.2 share. Nitro did a 3.07 rating, 3.39 first hour, 3.02 seconds hour, 2.82 third hour, and a 4.5 share. Over the head-to-head 2 hours and 6 minutes, Raw's 6.20 destroyed Nitro's 2.92. Monday Night Football did a 13.38 rating. Nitro's weakest rating since Russo took over is largely due to the show doing about what it has been doing in the second and third hours, but a very weak first hour, which can be attributed to ABC airing Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which did a phenomenal 16.74 rating, and to a far lesser extent because of competition aimed at the wrestling audience by A&E, which aired the Steve Austin bio, which despite a lot of advertising by A&E for its week of pro wrestling biographies, only did a 1.55 rating and 2.4 share for the live show. The replay show aimed at the West Coast audience drew a 1.06 rating. In comparison, A&E's Law and Order series did 1.6 and 2.0 ratings in its first and second runs that evening. Raw's peak number was for the Godfather vs. Angle and Jericho vs. Gangrel matches, doing a 6.65 rating. In the battle of the main events, Rock vs. Bossman did a 5.98 final quarter, shared with Triple H vs. Kane, actually the second lowest of the show, but increased to a 6.36 overrun. Nitro's Sid vs. Nash main event did a 2.99 final quarter hour, shared with Sting vs. Luger, and a 2.77 overrun. After the first quarter, the show never fell below a 5.98, with Big Show vs. Bulldog and Road Dogg vs. Al Snow both doing 6.32 ratings. In all, Raw doubled Nitro in every quarter except 2, when the Raw talking intro went against Goldberg vs. Hennigan Vampiro and Misfits vs. Wall in Berlin, 5.94 to 3.21, and when Asuka vs. Kimberly with Tori Wilson in a bikini went against the Acolytes Street Fight, 6.11 to 3.19. The Thursday ratings battle on November 11 saw SmackDown, featuring Arnold Schwarzenegger, set its all-time record doing a 5.06 rating and 7.7 share, destroying Thunder's 2.09 rating and 3.1 share. The combined head-to-head audience for Thursday wrestling only increased about 100,000 viewers from the previous week, even throwing Schwarzenegger into the mix, but the 10.1 million combined viewers for the first time ever saw Thursday's audience beat out the audience for the prior Monday, 9.6 million. For November 15th, the Monday combined audience grew to 10.56 million. For the weekend numbers, WWF Livewire did a 1.5, Superstars did a 1.8, and Sunday Night Heat leading up to Survivor Series did a 3.64. WCW Saturday Night did a 1.6 rating, which was the lowest rated show between noon and 11 p.m. on TBS that day. ECW on November 12th did an 0.93 rating and a 1.6 share. Even though the audience was down, the ratings indicate it was a good show because the audience grew throughout. Roller Jam, which had been building up that night for weeks as an angle blow-off with a match race with all the most pushed women in the promotion, only drew an 0.56 rating. Mexico, Jushin Liger and Gigante Silva returned to Mexico City and drew a very big crowd to Arena Mexico on November 12. In the main event, which was an elimination match, Liger, billed as IWGP World Junior Heavyweight Champion, so he may do a title defense in Mexico, teamed with Negro Casas and Mr. Niebla and Tarzan Boy to lose to Shocker and Blue Panther and Dr. Wagner Jr. and Scorpio Jr. It came down to Liger versus Shocker, with Shocker winning the fall via submission with a move that resembled a scorpion deathlock. The place was filled with Japanese photographers, and with Liger submitting, this should set Shocker up for a New Japan tour with a push. All the newspapers reported the match as not being good. Liger in particular was written up as being nowhere near as good as he had looked in Mexico in the past. However, the reports we received is that it was a 3.5 stars match which went 23 minutes with Wagner, Shocker and Liger carrying it. Liger worked in the main event on November 14th at Arena Coliseo, but was probably injured since he barely worked, teaming with Tinieblas Jr. and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. to beat Mascara Anno 2000 and Villano Tercero and Wagner Jr. He's also on the November 19th show in the semi-final, teaming with Tarzan Boy and Niebla against Shocker, Bestia Salvaje and Scorpio Jr. Silva and Atlantis, and Rayo beat La Furia Boricua, which is Pierroth Jr. and Fuerza Guerrera, and Villano Tercero and Gran Marcus Jr. when V3 was DQ'd for hitting Atlantis with a metal pipe to continue their lengthy feud. After the match, V3 unmasked and brutalized Atlantis once again. The November 19th main event will be Silva and Rayo in Atlantis versus V3 and Blue Panther and Black Warrior and Guerrera. Super Muñeco won a mask versus mask match on October 31st in Mexicali over El Hijo de Huracan Ramirez, who was unmasked as Salvador Duran of Mexico City, who is actually of no relation to anyone who has ever used the Huracan Ramirez gimmick in the past. Muñeco has a legit record of more than 100-0 in masked matches. Brazo de Plata has bleached his hair strawberry blonde, which may be a prelude to his losing a hair match, and the triangle hair match with himself, Pierroth Jr. and Apollo Dantes will be November 26th at Arena Mexico. In a WWF-like soap opera storyline, Pentagon and Esther Moreno were dating, but Pentagon beat up Oriental, who is in real life Esther's brother, so Esther dumped him. AAA has a TV taping scheduled for December 2nd in Tijuana, and while nothing is definite, there may be an internationally based angle on that show. AAA is also running a November 19th show in Tijuana headlined by Pero Oguayo Jr. vs. Cobarde in a hair versus hair match. Pirata Morgan is back with AAA. Violencia was falsely named in a murder case this past week. A 44-year-old woman named Maria del Carmen Campos was murdered on November 8th. The police immediately arrested a man named Raul Romero, who was listed as being a pro wrestler. Excelsior, considered the New York Times of Mexico, listed that Romero was the man who wrestles regularly in EMLL as Violencia. On November 10th, Violencia went to the police station with paycheck stubs and with his friends and a few fellow wrestlers to prove his name wasn't Raul Romero, but his name took a tremendous PR hit during the week before it became apparent he wasn't the man who was arrested. A tabloid claimed Raul Romero's wrestling name was Furia Salvaje. Furia Salvaje's wrestling name is Raul Romero Jr., but apparently they aren't the same person. All Japan. Steve Williams' loyalty to the All Japan promotion was rewarded as they are bringing him back for the January 2nd to January 23rd tour. They are also bringing 2 Cold Scorpio back on the tour. The other foreigners are Vader, Johnny Ace, Mike Burton, George Hines, and Manukia Mossman. They open January 2nd and January 3rd at Korakuen Hall, plus have major shows January 9th at Fukuoka Kakusai Center, January 11th at Kagoshima Arena, January 17th at Osaka Furitsu Gym, January 22nd at Korakuen Hall, and finish up January 23rd at Yokohama Bunka Gym. It was announced that at some point next year, current tag champs Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama will break up their burning team. Kobashi said it's necessary for the future of All Japan for Akiyama to go on his own and challenge Kobashi in a program. Kobashi said they were the best team in the world, but the team has to break up so Akiyama can be in the spotlight and that 2 younger wrestlers get the chance to be part of teams with each of them. He said he didn't know exactly when the team would break up, probably after the summer, but said it would be before next year's tag team tournament so they could captain different teams. The tag team tournament opened on November 13th at Korakuen Hall before the usual sellout of 2,100. In the main event, Vader and Johnny Smith scored an upset over Mitsuharu Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa when Smith pinned Ogawa after a reverse DDT in 25-22. The other tournament matches saw Stan Hansen and Akira Taue over Gary Albright and Wolf Hockfield in 11:44 when Hansen lariated Hockfield, and Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama beat Tamon Honda and Masao Inoue in 17:08 when Kobashi lariated Honda. The November 14th Korakuen Hall show before the same 2,100 sellout saw in tournament matches, Inoue and Honda beat Takayama and Omori in 18:36 when Inoue cradled Omori, and Vader and Smith beat Ace and Burton when Vader pinned Burton in 14:50 after a power bomb. In the former, Omori accidentally lariated Takayama, causing them to lose, and they are continuing the angle as the next night they continued a dissension angle. November 15th in Saku drew 800 fans, which is quite a statement when a tag team tourney house show draws a crowd that small. It was a very good show, with the only tournament match being Kobashi and Akiyama going to a 30-minute draw with Smith and Vader. October 31st TV show did a 4.0 rating. New Japan. Besides Bill Goldberg vs. Rick Steiner, other matches announced at New Japan's November 11th press conference for the January 4th Tokyo Dome show were a rematch with Genichiro Tenryu vs. Kensuke Sasaki, Kimo vs. Kazuyuki Fujita, and an IWGP Junior title match involving Jushin Liger. So much for keeping his boycott angle strong for more than 1 week. Also to be added may be Shinya Hashimoto vs. Naoya Ogawa and an IWGP heavyweight title match with Keiji Muto vs. Masahiro Chono, plus something involving Riki Choshu vs. Atsushi Onita, which will probably be horrible but have to be relied on to sell the place out if they don't do Hashimoto vs. Ogawa. Ogawa, who will wrestle on the UFO November 28th in the Netherlands, at this point hasn't gotten an offer to appear on the show. He was asked to be on the January 30th proposed DSC shoot tournament at the Tokyo Dome but said he wanted to face Nobuhiko Takada in a singles match. Takada has already refused to put him over, and doesn't want to do the proposed tournament. They will also have a retirement ceremony for Kazuo Yamazaki, 37, who will have his final career match on the card against Yuji Nagata. Yamazaki is retiring due to being all banged up, including problems with his lung and bronchitis dating back to 1996. He had trouble breathing while wrestling this year and he turned white. He came back for the G1 tournament, but couldn't do much, put people over every night and didn't even wrestle on the final night and hasn't worked since. Yamazaki wrestled for 17th of January 2nd years, starting with New Japan as a training partner of Satoru Sayama, going to the first UWF with Sayama, Akira Maeda and Nobuhiko Takada in 1984, returning to New Japan when that group folded in 1986. Rejoined the second UWF when it started in 1988 and then joining UWFI when UWF folded in 1991 before returning to New Japan when UWFI fell into financial problems in 1995. He started as an understudy and training partner of Satoru Sayama, gained his most fame in the UWFI in the early 90s as kind of a number 2 babyface behind Nobuhiko Takada in the role of the guy who would put the next challenger over to set up Takada's win, and later had a lot of good matches in New Japan rings. Originally at a November 15th New Japan press conference, the Muto vs. Chono IWGP title match was to be announced, but with Muto's mother Takiko suddenly passing away of a heart attack at the age of 67 at her home in Fuji Yoshida on November 14th, Keiji Muto rushed home the next day. He'd been in Minneapolis undergoing treatment for his shot knees. There is some talk within the company of holding Hashimoto off the Dome show, although without him, I don't see how they can fill the place. There is the feeling they'll have him join UFO, then come back to New Japan as a UFO member for the April Tokyo Dome. The Choshu/Onita first angle took place on November 12th at an Onita show at Korakuen Hall. Onita was in the ring saying he'd been waiting until that day for Choshu's answer to his challenge. New Japan front office man Katsuji Nagashima showed up with a vinyl bag of dirty, smelly, unwashed Riki Choshu t-shirts and gave them to Onita as his message that Choshu has been training. Onita said, of the apparent response that the mountain had moved and that Choshu would wrestle him, and he shook hands with Nagashima. Onita and Tenryu then beat Ichiro Yaguchi and Dr. Luther and Steele in a handicap barbed wire main event. Don Frye did an interview with Fight World and came out even stronger, issuing a challenge for a shoot match against Ken Shamrock than even in his recent Full Contact Fighter interview. Speaking of Frye, he was at a Rage in the Cage NHB show in Honolulu on October 15th, and he seemed mad that members of Marcelo Tigers, who fought in the main event, team accidentally slammed into his shoulder and some women hit his wife a few times with their cups. Frye immediately after the show challenged Tiger to a match on the next show. Tiger apparently just wanted to blow off the situation. Frye also had a funny quote in the most recent Full Contact Fighter when asked about a proposal made by Dan Severn to bring back all the past UFC champions for a one-night tournament of champions. Frye said he'd be up for it, but unfortunately, Dan wants people to take a drug test. What does he want to do? Win the thing by default? Over the weekend, Frye competed in a judo tournament in Nevada in the super heavyweight division. He's now over 230 pounds and lost to 400-pound Eric Pele. October 30th TV show did a 2.2 rating. Other Japan notes. Akira Maeda announced 10 of the participants for the second part of the Rings tournament on December 22nd at Osaka Furitsu Gym as Kiyoshi Tamura, Tsuyoshi Kosuka, Wataru Sakata, Gilbert Yvel, Folk Han, Bitsajay Teriel, Christopher Haseman, Joop Kasteel, Andrei Kopylov and Ricardo Fayed, who should be a pro wrestler even though he hasn't done any worked matches here yet, just because he's got the look and charisma. This throws a lot of question marks into the tournament as Han, Teriel, Kasteel and Kopylov have done primarily works in this group, and with the exception of Han, who is past his prime, not good workers at that, and Tamura, who is skilled in shooting and the group's biggest star and its world heavyweight champion, still has to be protected in a shooting environment because of his size, as has already been shown in the past when he wasn't protected. From the lineup, I almost sense there will be some protection. FMW is hopeful of getting a packed house in the 17,010-seat Yokohama Arena for its November 23 major show. They've made various deals to sell the cheaper tickets at well below market rate and keep the high-priced tickets, which sell easier for themselves. This is actually fairly common Japanese business, and thus their pre-sale at this point has topped 8,000 tickets, although the gate for that is probably only in the $150,000 range. On the November 10th show in Hakata, they did an angle where President Shoichi Arai, as special referee in the Masato Tanaka and H vs Koto Fuyuki and Fake Hayabusa, Mr. Ganasuke, match, saw Fuyuki used an armbar to break Arai's arm, but he still made the 3 count when Tanaka pinned Fuyuki. The Yoshimoto Corporation, which is the biggest entertainment company in Japan, which also owns the JD promotion, is going to sponsor Super Delphin's Osaka Pro Wrestling promotion. They'll produce a local television show and will have access to major celebrities being involved with them. The Japanese, who have actually more a cultural curiosity than Americans when it comes to woman versus man combat events, China and Asia get an inordinate amount of publicity in the Japanese daily newspapers, but have been behind the US in this wrestling trend because of their greater emphasis on product credibility, are about to break down the barriers. LLPW announced Shinobu Kondori, considered to be the toughest of all the Japanese women wrestlers, will face a male wrestler on a December 9th show at Korakuen Hall. On the November 10th Big Japan show in Mashu, Shunmei Matsuzaki and Kamikaze retained the Big Japan tag titles, beating Ryuji Yamakawa and Tomoaki Honma in 30-27. CMLL Japan announced its 3-show tour from November 21st through November 25th with the final show at Korakuen Hall, which features Negro Casas, Pirata Morgan, El Satanico, Super Parka, Ultimo Guerrero, Pierre Roth Jr., Ricky Marvin, and Virus. The top matches on the tour are an IWRG heavyweight title match with Morgan defending against Super Parka, some speculation that this will be a title change, on November 23rd in Miya, and a CMLL super lightweight title match with Masato Yakashiji of Osaka Pro Wrestling defending against Virus. Urgent announced the top 2 matches for its last major show of the year, which is December 11th at Yokohama Bunka Gym, as Ayako Hamada and Akino, Mika Akino, defending their Twin Stars version tag belts against Etsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda, plus Asia Kong versus Mariko Yoshida for the Queen Aversion title, and Shaparita Asari defends the Sky High Aversion title against Hiromi Yagi. Bobby Blaze, who was recently fired by WCW, and Caro Russo, will be on the next Michinoku tour. Former women's wrestling legend Bull Nakano once again failed to qualify for Japan's Women's Pro Golf Tour. This was the second time she's tried. It's more of a publicity stunt at this point because she's not a pro-caliber golfer. On the November 12th JD show in Nagoya, Kuga issued a challenge putting her mask up against the TWF World title held by Linus Asuka. Asuka didn't accept, saying that she first had to get past her singles match with Dynamite Kansai on December 18th. AJW's final big show of the year is December 8th at Tokyo Yoyogi Gym 2 with Linus Asuka versus Nani Takahashi, Yumiko Hata versus Takako Inoue for the WWWA title. Etsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda defend the WWWA tag titles against Tomoko Watanabe and Kumiko Makawa, and Kyoko Inoue versus Manami Toyota in their first singles match in years. The two used to have incredible singles matches against each other, including an Observer Match of the Year winner during the early and mid-90s. Here and there, Vern Gagne, 73, had triple heart bypass surgery about 2 weeks ago. His recovery is apparently doing very well. Tully Blanchard, 45, was charged with assault on his wife Corndy, 28, in an alleged incident on October 9 in a story in the November 16 Charlotte Observer. According to a Charlotte Mecklenburg police report, she called police at 4 p.m. that day claiming the two argued and that her estranged husband, the two are legally separated, tried to force a ring off her finger. The report said that Tully grabbed her hand and kept twisting and prying to get the ring off. The victim suffered a bruised left thumb and hand and was crying hysterically. After being served with the arrest warrant, Tully Blanchard was released on $2,500 bond. November 13th in Memphis, they totally dropped all references to what happened last week as Brian Christopher, Spellbinder, Tommy Rich and Doug Gilbert not only weren't there but were never brought up. There seems to be a lot of expectation that Jerry Lawler is going to try and tie Gilbert up in court over what he said. Instead, Jim Cornette came in from Louisville with his OVW crew including Nick Dinsmore, Scotty Saber, BJ Payne and Trailer Park Trash, and they talked about OVW wrestling. The show built to a long PPW title match with Steve Bradley defending against Dinsmore, and they tried to put it over as something special. Dinsmore kicked out after being hit with a tennis racket. The finish saw Seven, a very green newcomer doing a bodyguard for Cornette gimmick, hit Dinsmore with the racket and Bradley got the pin. MMA. At this point it appears that with Mark Kerr pulling out of the Pride 8 show that Enson Inoue won't be fighting on the show. The Kazushi Sakuraba vs. Royler Gracie match has been moved to the main event slot. There's a lot of controversy going into the match with reports that Gracie is trying to make massive changes in the rules due to the size differential. Sakuraba is about 190 pounds while Gracie is about 150. There are a lot of reports about what the changes he wants are, but it appears he wants the elimination of rounds and it just be a 30-minute match with no judges, but that he be awarded the win, because he's so much smaller, in the event the match goes to the time limit. There may be also modifications, some of which may be fairly serious, of the current Pride rules for this match. Alexander Otska, who faces Renzo Gracie on the show, has said during the match he's going to honor Rikitozen by doing Rikitozen chops. Sakuraba did something similar on the last show, saying he was going to honor Billy Robinson, who coached him at one point, by doing a double arm suplex, but that move is easier said than done in a shoot situation. Francisco Bueno, a top-rated Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu heavyweight, faces Igor Vachintin in a match just announced for this week's Pride show. The current plan is for the next UFC show in the United States to be either on February 4th or February 11th. John Peretti's latest idea for the main event is to be Boss Rutan vs. Renzo Gracie for the vacant middleweight title, which leaves Tito Ortiz as the odd man out. ECW. The TNN tapings on November 13th in Binghamton, New York drew about 4,400 fans, with 3,500 paid. Nova and David Cash beat the Dupp brothers. Simon Diamond beat Jazz when Big Dick Hertz used the penile implant on Jazz. I'm waiting for the situation to come up where they need to use that term on TNN. In a match scheduled to air this weekend, Lynn beat Crazy, or you could call it a three-way with Tajiri, since Lynn ended up beating Tajiri. Tajiri sprayed ref Jim Molyneux, so second ref John Finnegan had to come in. Roadkill and Danny During beat C.W. Anderson and Bill Wiles. In another match that should air this week, Axel Rotten and Balls Mahoney faced Vito Lograsso and PN News, who is now going by the name Simply News. The other Baldies ran in with Vic Grimes as the newest member of the team. Mahoney gave Lograsso the Nutcracker Suite on 2 chairs, which may be the injury blow-off for Lograsso, who is being replaced on the team by Grimes since apparently he's got a lot of heat with people. Lograsso may be brought back for one last injury angle, or this could have been his injury angle. New Jack did his customary run-in for the save. Grimes was only out there about a minute, so nobody could really tell anything about him. Tajiri beat Little Guido in a match with a lot of interference. Mike Awesome beat Spike Dudley after a powerbomb through a table. In another TNN taping match, Raven and Dreamer kept the tag titles, beating Rhino and Chris Condito in what was apparently a really hot match. Francine gave Tammy Sitch a DDT. Dreamer gave Condito a DDT. Corino and Victory did a run-in until Sandman made the save and cleaned house. Sandman ended up caning Raven. Raven was mad. Sandman then accidentally caned Dreamer, which wound up with Francine yelling at Sandman. Main event, which wasn't taped, saw Sabu pin Justin Credible. The other weekend house shows were November 11th in Staten Island and November 12th in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, which both drew about 600 fans, with Raven and Dreamer and Sandman over Credible and Lance Storm and Rhino as the main event both nights. Grimes has moved to the Philadelphia area at the request of WWF, and it was basically their suggestion to Heyman that got him into ECW. James Vandenberg was again backstage at the TNN taping. TNN show on October 12th was pretty basic, taped back on September 30th in Dayton. The show was built around wrestling rather than presenting the catfights as the most important item, and in fact they didn't even make references to catfights during the show. Perhaps trying to refocus onto the wrestling as the most important part of the show, and not have that WWF-like pay-per-view crowd reaction like they had last week. Dreamer did an interview pretending to be Raven, saying how everyone has misery in their lives and you just have to deal with it. He then smashed his head into a bathroom metal plate over and over until he bled. which seems sort of stupid, although old-timers used to do interviews where they'd punch their scars with rings and give themselves hard ways to show how tough they were, and this is an updated version of the same. Lynn beat Corino in 3 minutes with the cradle piledriver despite interference from Victory. Tajiri ran in and blew the green mist in Lynn's eyes, and Tajiri and Victory double-teamed him until Crazy made the save. Lynn, blinded, then attacked Crazy. They started a storyline that seemingly will end up with Cyrus doing the color on the TNN shows where he's doing a mock office role, kind of a spoof on WCW's Higher Powers. When Cyrus delivered the line about Gertner having heat with the boys and that he was getting himself over at the expense of the talent, it was word for word what Don Callis was told by Bruce Pritchard at the WWF to explain why they fired him a few years back. Tajiri pinned Crazy in 6:05 when Lynn interfered and gave Crazy a cradle piledriver. It was their typical good match, but a shorter version. Crazy did a moonsault off another balcony. Rhino vs. Sandman went 5:28 with a no contest sports entertainment ending. More than anyone else on the show, far more for his ring entrance than anything in the ring, Sandman comes off on this show like a real star due to the fan reaction. Just as the match was starting, they went into the bathroom for an Axel and Balls interview where the Baldies jumped them. They are pushing Angel as king of the streets and that he'd feud with New Jack over that moniker. I always thought that was Marco. Sandman did a Frankensteiner of the top rope which Joel Gertner called a Heineken Rana, except they said Sandman doesn't drink imported beer. Jason and Justin Credible interfered and caned Sandman to death. Dreamer came out but they were killing him. Raven was watching and finally made the save, with the explanation being that Raven won't allow anyone but himself beat up Dreamer. Raven cleaned house, and then Sandman got up and started attacking Raven. Raven did an interview where he kept repeating over and over how he did the right thing but the drunk beat him up, trying to give the impression it was a childhood torment of coming home after doing the right thing but a drunken dad still beat him. The ECW Hardcore show opened with Paul Heyman on the air complaining like Raven to Raven about the Sandman being a drunk and the Impact players wanting title matches and all the pressure he's under to do something new every week. The show featured 3 matches, all of which were good, and all of which had the same ending, a splash off the top. When Rob Van Dam did it, it was a 5-star frog splash. When Roadkill did it, it was an Amish splash. And when Mike Awesome did it, it was an awesome splash. Van Dam beat Guido in about 13 minutes. Match was well put together early. Van Dam's spots with Big Sal didn't look good. He set up the splash with a Van Daminator off the top with Fonzie holding a chair. They aired the dark match from the November 7th pay-per-view show with Danny During and Roadkill, who played babyfaces, beating C.W. Anderson and Bill Wiles in 4:34 in a very good short match with tremendous crowd heat. Everyone worked hard and looked good here. This beat to hell those first 2 matches, and for that matter the last 2 matches on the pay-per-view. Finally Awesome beat Taz after powerbombing him through a table and doing the splash off the top in 7:20. The first few minutes were brawling outside the ring, but when they got in the ring, it was a good match with a lot of heat as well. Awesome is still going to kill himself with all the chances he takes at his size. If Heyman wants to do what the other companies aren't on television, this show accomplished that. Since nobody really cares that much about syndicated ratings on stations that are paid for the airtime, he can put on good wrestling matches without the pressure of the reality of quarter-hour ratings. Regarding TNN's ECW doctrine where men can't beat up women, on the November 5th Roller Jam show, there was a game that finished with a male skater, Sean Atkinson, giving what was basically a gut-wrench suplex on skates to a female skater, Denise Loden, and then crotched her hard on the post on the track. Since both Roller Jam and ECW fall under the sports entertainment umbrella as working violent and contrived sports, the standards for both on the station should be identical. Obviously I'm not suggesting I want to see men beating up women on ECW TV, just pointing out standards should be the same. Also, if TNN wanted to do a cross-promotion to build Roller Jam's ratings, they should have some of the women on Roller Jam appear on ECW for an angle, although unless they were to make repeated appearances that wouldn't be in Heyman's best interest because it serves no purpose to introduce women on the show more attractive than the ones in your stable, and not undercard ECW talent do an angle on Roller Jam. Johnny Smith is expected to return after the All Japan Tag Team Tournament. There are current plans to work on setting up a lot of the underneath wrestlers and give them more of a distinct personality and a better look, more flashy ring outfits, etc., to have the undercard guys look more major league. Tico, the friend of Sabu's talked about on the pay-per-view show, was a 37-year-old friend of his he grew up with in Lansing, Michigan, who had died 2 weeks earlier, which hit him very hard. Masato Tanaka is booked to return for some dates in December, and Heyman is trying to get him to come in as a regular in 2000, saying that if he can get him as a regular he'd give him a run with the world title. Van Damme is just about ready to return full-time. He's only worked TV since his wife's jet ski accident. Current working plans for the next pay-per-view are Dreamer and Raven vs. Storm, Incredible and New Jack vs. Angel. And he's working on getting fresh opponents for Awesome and Van Damme. He's trying to avoid going back to Van Damme vs. Lin for a long time, and also trying to hold back the inevitable Sabu vs. Van Damme. WCW. November 21st pay-per-view lineup looks to be the WCW Final Four with Sting vs. Hart and Benoit vs. Jarrett, along with the finals, which most expect to be Benoit vs. Hart, and it's a pick'em as far as that finish goes. The rest of the show is Goldberg vs. Vicious I Quit match, Vampiro vs. Berlin Chain match, Disco vs. Karagi's Cruiserweight title match with a $25,000 side bet, Luger vs. Meng, Rick Steiner vs. Hall, David Flair vs. Kimberly, Smiley vs. Knobs to create the hardcore title, Conan and Kidman and Tori Wilson vs. Saturn and Malenko and Asya and Bagwell vs. Hennig. Nitro on November 15th came from the new Alltel Arena in Little Rock, Arkansas before 10,435 fans, which was 8,271 paying $267,545. Being the biggest wrestling show ever in Arkansas at an arena that just opened, the crowd enthusiasm level was way above usual, which made it come across as a hot TV show. Smiley beat Jimmy Hart in a hardcore match in 4:46. Smiley came out in a football uniform and Hart came out in a Lanny Poffo hand-me-town suit of armor. This allowed them to pound on each other with garbage can lids and broomsticks without really hurting each other. They got Smiley's helmet off and he took a lot of head blows with objects from Hart and Knobs. Finally, Hart was pinned on the floor after going through a table. Knobs destroyed Smiley with garbage can, chair and broom shots after the match. Match was bad, but at least the crowd seemed to enjoy the spectacle. The Nitro girls talked about AC Jazz, Amy Crawford, quitting. They had scheduled an AC Jazz vs. Spice Mud wrestling match for the show, but AC Jazz refused to do it and quit the company. Tigress then jumped Spice so they can start a new Nitro Girls angle. It was as bad as all the Nitro Girls angles. Hall and Nash came out with Nash doing a Sid impression. It was at least better than his Vince and Wizard impressions. Sid came out as a face to respond. Sid challenged Nash to a match, but Nash said he was still retired. Later he did an interview saying how it was a lame angle, that is why he's retired. Who booked that lame angle? And that he did it because wrestling wasn't fun, but not it's fun. Russo yelled at Kimberly and told her she had to wrestle Asya later in the show. Actually, Russo told her she would have to wrestle an experienced wrestler. I guess Asya, with all her years of experience in the ring, now fits that bill. Creative Control, who are now called Gerald and Patrick, Gerald Briscoe and Patrick Patterson, beat Booker T in a handicap match in 2:56. They never even mentioned Stevie Ray's name on the show. The lights went out as Booker was getting pounded, and Anne-Marie Crooks, who it appears will be called Midnight, made the save pounding on the two giant twins. Jimmy Hart did an interview and Flynn argued with Barbarian. Russo yelled at DOA, or the Blue Brothers, talking about Dutch Mantle. Wasn't his name Uncle Zeb? Just to make sure the other 95% of the fans who only watch casually realize the Two Ball Twins are rejects from the WWF who failed with several different gimmicks. In a totally horrible segment, Evan Karagi's beat ref Johnny Boone in 2:47 when Medusa grabbed Boone's face, put it in her boobs, and he basically passed out. Medusa was at ringside doing the worst job of color commentary since the days of Herb Abrams. Russo yelled at the Luchadores. Hoovy had a piñata. Russo said they would do a piñata on a pole match with a check for $10,000 in the piñata. This led to a disaster of mammoth proportions. The Battle Royal took place. You already know what happened there. 3 guys wound up in the hospital. For real. Goldberg beat Hennig in 4:19 with a knee bar submission. Hey, at least I know what the move is called. They said that since Hennig wasn't pinned, he doesn't have to retire. The lack of logic in this show is reaching Nash-level proportions. Don't they realize the lack of logic is what got them into this mess? Russo told Tori Wilson it's all about ratings and she had to referee in a striped bikini. Well, that's the only idea of the night which drew any kind of a ratings shift. Berlin and the Wall, new name for Jade Toot, beat Vampiro and Misfits in 3:35. Wall was put over as being a giant monster who couldn't be hurt. Wall killed the Misfits, leaving Vampiro against both. They kept killing him, but pulling each other off over who would get the pin. Finally, Wall choke slammed him. Berlin destroyed Vampiro with a chain after the match. Sid vs. Rick Steiner ended with no finish as Sid powerbombed Steiner through the stage. They did the whole stretcher, neck brace and ambulance scene with Steiner. For whatever reason, maybe because it was Arkansas, This crowd actually bought the injury and cheered as Steiner was wheeled out. Flynn and Barbarian brawled in the back with Flynn knocking him out with knees and kicks to the chest. A knockout from a kick to the chest? It was really bad. Asya vs. Kimberly only lasted a few seconds. Clearly the whole show was Wilson in a bikini. Kidman came out and put clothes on Wilson. David Flair came out with a tire iron after Kimberly, who ran. Asya beat the hell out of David, including an elbow to the groin, but David came back and suplexed Asya and hit Shane Douglas in the arm with the tire iron before the Revolution came in. Luger sent Sting flowers, but he didn't want them. Benoit beat Hall in 9:38 in a WCW tourney match. Best match of the night. Bret Hart and Nash were at ringside. Lots of interference ending with a submission with the crossface. Hart beat Kidman in a WCW tourney match in 3:46 with the sharpshooter. Way too short. Hall and Nash came out and tried to sexually molest Wilson. The filthy animals came out, and boy was it obvious they're jabronis. When do four babyfaces come out to save the girl and get beaten up by two heels without even getting an offensive move in? Especially since they're already getting punked again later in the show and weren't allowed catchphrase time on the show. Jarrett beat Bagwell in 2:03 when Creative Control interfered in a tourney match. Bagwell hit Don Harris with the guitar, but Jarrett used a reverse Russian leg sweep, pulled the stroke, for the pin while Marcus Johnson played heel ref, tying his shoes during all the interference. Jarrett and Ron Harris were beating on Bagwell until Dustin Rhodes made the save. Luger put X-Lax in brownies for Sting, but Duggan ended up eating them. You know the gag that came out of that. Saturn and Malenko destroyed Conan and Guerrero in 2:56 in a match where they handcuffed and shackled both members without virtually no offense from the other side. Mysterio Jr. ran in, after already getting destroyed 2 segments earlier. They tied him upside down from the top of the cage and continually dropkicked his knee to explain his being out with surgery. Asya managed to beat up Mysterio Jr. in there as well. Sting beat Luger in 5:07 in the last tourney match. Luger was shocked that Sting wasn't in the bathroom. Liz maced Sting and Luger racked him, but Meng ran in and put the death grip on Luger and put Sting on top. Liz tried to mace Meng, but the bottle wouldn't work. Finally Sid NC Nash in 7:45. Think of the idea of booking these two for 8 minutes and Kidman and Hart for 4 minutes. It was a no DQ match. Fans were into it, but the only moves sold were low blows. After about 2 minutes, the fans were so into these two that the only crowd reactions were chants for Goldberg. Hall interfered for several minutes, but it was no DQ. Goldberg then made the save and speared Hall and Nash. Now that was a DQ. Hall and Nash left. Sid attacked Goldberg. Goldberg powerslammed Sid, who popped right up, gave him a low blow and was beating on him until Hart saved Goldberg and the show went off the air. The Thunder time slot move will take place starting on January 12th. The show from that point forward will air on Wednesdays from 9 to 11 p.m. Bret Hart appeared on the Howard Stern show on November 10th, plugging Wrestling with Shadows. Stern hadn't seen the movie and didn't know the story. They mainly talked about their respective divorces since Stern is currently going through a divorce. Hart said that he and his ex-wife are on good terms, basically saying they're dating and trying to reconcile, and Stern hoped he could eventually get back on good terms with his wife. Stern and Robin Quivers were both outraged that the WWF continued the show after Owen Hart died, with Hart saying the WWF's excuse was they were afraid the fans in Kansas City would riot if the show was stopped. Actually, many people after the fact gave me reasons, and that wasn't one of them, until much later when the original reasons didn't seem to be sounding as good as they did when they were first come up with. Stern and Quivers both said that was ridiculous and pretty well figured the real reason was the company didn't want to be out the pay-per-view money. The funny thing is, that needn't have been an issue either, as a precedent had already been set with the Beware of Dog pay-per-view when there were technical problems that they could have simply stopped the show at that point and continued it the following Tuesday, since they ran a show in Peoria anyway that night, and finished the pay-per-view at that point, and everyone who ordered the pay-per-view could have gotten it then. Just like when baseball games are rained out, you simply use your ticket for a game later and the team isn't out the ticket money. People have made a procedure that takes place routinely in many entertainment events, not deaths on the field, but cancellation and rescheduling of performances, and acted like it was an impossible task to deal with. The big item of gossip was Hart making almost an insinuation that people took to mean a gay affair with Vince McMahon and Shawn Michaels. Stern immediately gave him an out to back away from the statement, and Hart really didn't back away, just saying he had no proof. After the segment ended, off the air, Stern told Hart that he was going to watch the movie and wanted him back on the show after he did. Hart was on Wrestling Observer Live 2 days later and called it an 8 a.m. statement and that it was something rumored in wrestling, but it probably wasn't true, and pretty much said he'd like to forget he ever said it. He also talked about talking with Dynamite Kid when he was in England and that there is an operation that he's interested in doing that might get him out of the wheelchair, but there are no guarantees. Dynamite's first doctor advised against it, but he's holding out hope for any possibility. Both Hart and Mick Foley have talked about wanting to set up a fundraiser, whether it be a show or autograph sessions in England, to raise $30,000 for the operation. He also said he has no animosity whatsoever regarding Neidhart signing with WWF and that his problem with Bulldog wasn't with him going to work there, but the way he handled the publicity and things he said publicly regarding going back. There was an incident that allegedly took place on November 6th at a Kid Rock concert in Tampa at the Sun Dome involving Randy Savage, Randy Poffo, who turns 47 this week, and Gorgeous George, Stephanie Bellers, and according to one report, Mona, Noreen Greenwald, and Road Warrior Hawk, Mike Hegstrand, 42, and his wife. There are various stories as to exactly what happened, but there was a fight, and Poffo either sucker punched Hegstrand and knocked him out, or they simply traded punches and Poffo got the better of the situation. As you'll see, Hegstrand disputes that report. During the altercation, Bellers and another woman, described on one report as Mona and other reports claim it was a different friend of Bellers, also got into it with Hegstrand's wife and was pulling out clumps of her hair. The belief is that Hegstrand was going to file a lawsuit against him for the incident. Since this is wrestling, there is also speculation they were working their own angle for when both become free agents early next year, although the general feeling at this point is that isn't the case. In a long-forgotten incident, which I believe took place on April 29, 1996 at the Tokyo Dome or thereabouts, there was an altercation backstage at a pro wrestling show in Japan between the two that definitely was not an angle, and on that day, Poffo was the one who came out worse, although I don't remember the details, but I seem to recall it was two guys with a short fuse yelling and a basic sucker punch and not a fight. Bubba the Love Sponge, who is a major Tampa DJ who has worked for WWF, WCW and ECW when they run live shows in the area, talked about this, saying the altercation took place backstage at the concert. Hegstrand, as Hawk, was on the show and talked about his altercation in Japan, which he claimed was about 18 months ago. Poffo privately claimed it was 3 years ago, which he claimed was started when Poffo said something bad about Hegstrand's wife, and he claimed the two had a fight with him getting the best of it. Hawk said he saw Savage and stuck his hand out to shake his hand and Savage slapped his hand away, and sucker punched him. Hawk stated he wasn't even fazed by the punch, grabbed Savage and was about to beat the crap out of him when people pulled them apart. Hawk said that Mona and George assaulted his wife, causing her to bleed, and claimed that because of that, he's talked with lawyers about suing Savage. Hawk tried to sell his tough guy image by saying he didn't care about being hit and it was no big deal, but that he was mad because of what happened to his wife. Poffo was called and because of the pending litigation, declined comment. Rey Mysterio Jr., as it turns out, is scheduled to be undergoing full reconstructive knee surgery for both a torn meniscus and a torn ACL on November 23 by Dr. James Andrews in Birmingham, Alabama, and will be out of the ring as far as active wrestling probably until the middle of next year. He's at least talking like he'll be back on television as soon as he can walk, which should be late January, and try and do angles that involve him but don't lead to him doing wrestling matches. Shane Douglas got a favorable opinion regarding the healing of his torn bicep, and he may be back in the ring within a few months. Even if he didn't get the favorable review, Douglas has a track record of rushing his recoveries after surgeries, and the result has been in most cases re-injury. The current feeling regarding Dusty Rhodes is that he really is not with the company right now, but they are going to work his being let go into Dustin's angle. This clearly does open up the possibility for him coming back as part of the angle. Thunder taping from November 10th in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The first show, which aired the next evening, opened with LaRue over Karagi's. Disco was at ringside trying to hit on Medusa. After the match, Disco challenged Karagi's for the Cruiserweight title and made a side bet of $25,000 for the Mayhem pay-per-view show. One would think Disco will lose the match and title, which will have even more credibility with Karagi's as champ, and go deeper into gambling debt. They had a backstage scene so everyone could see Terry Taylor was backstage. Berlin beat Curly Bill via DQ. It was revealed that Berlin was really Alex Wright. Vampiro interfered. La Parka and Silver King beat Villano V and Lizmark Jr. They did an interview where Parka spoke perfect English, but of course it wasn't really Parka. Chavo Guerrero Jr. tried to sell Amway products to V5. Parka got a surprisingly strong crowd reaction. Rick Steiner beat Booker T via DQ in a TV title match. Vicious interfered and powerbombed Steiner after a ref bump and put T on top, and Billy Silverman counted the pin. Johnny Boone came out and told Silverman what happened and the decision was reversed. Vicious then powerbombed both refs. Hennig beat Malenko. At one point Douglas hit Hennig with his cast. Disco ran in and tried to pin Hennig with the idea that the P that B would like him, I guess they could give him a new storyline where people owe him money, and give him a push if he pins Hennig. Anyway, Benoit foiled their plans by giving Malenko a diving headbutt and Hennig got the pin. Maestro beat Knobs in a hardcore match when Smiley interfered. Conan and Kidman kept the tag titles, beating Barbarian and Flynn. During a close-up, Tori gave the look of "what am I doing here with these guys? If she keeps going from guy to guy like that, she's going to develop a reputation." Luger pretended to have a knee injury and couldn't wrestle Kaz Hayashi. Hayashi called him chicken shit, so Luger destroyed him and racked him. Liz then had to remind Luger to sell the knee after the match. Sid beat Saturn via DQ and Malenko and Asya interfered. Sid power-bombed Malenko and Saturn after. He went to power-bomb Asya, but Steiner attacked him. For the show that airs on November 18th, Bigelow beat Flynn in a hardcore match when Jimmy Hart tried to interfere but Smiley stopped him. Title match, further helping restore the prestige of the Cruiserweight title. Disco was distracted by getting a fish wrapped in a newspaper, Godfather I, to insinuate he'd be sleeping with the fishes if he didn't pay his gambling debts. Disco attacked Aokiya after the match with a loaded fish. Maestro beat Karagis. Medusa was making out with Karagis, which enabled Maestro to score the pin. On WCW Live, Medusa was claiming she was having an affair with Karagis. When asked about her husband, former Cincinnati Bengals lineman Ken Blackman, she claimed it was okay because they have an open marriage. Parka and Hayashi beat Dandy and Silver King. Parka, with his fake English voice, was trying to teach Hayashi to speak better English. Hennig beat Van Hammer in a match where Bagwell and Benoit both interfered and Hammer collided with Benoit to lead to getting Fisherman suplexed. LaRue beat Kenny Chaos. Barbarian pinned Chavo Jr. in 15 seconds. Chavo was still selling Amway products. Vampiro beat Meng via DQ when Meng put the Tongan death grip on one of the Misfits. Luger made the save, attacking Meng with some bad chair shots. TV Main saw Benoit over Bagwell when Hennig helped Benoit. Dark match had Hart over Luger with the sharpshooter. Funny that Hart was on the show and worked the main event. They kept the fans from leaving by constantly pushing this match. Got the biggest pop of the show even though it was 4 hours in, but was never used even for an interview on the TV portion. Sid is expected to be in line for a huge babyface push. Vampiro was dressed down by several of the agents because he gave Berlin such a weak-looking chain shot on the Thunder show when doing the interference spot. WCW was looking at getting Bob Holly when his contract was about to become due, but WWF signed him back up. Torrie Wilson is in the process of being switched from a per-night deal to a regular contract. House shows for the week saw WCW Saturday Night taping on November 9th in Champaign, Illinois drew 4,261 paying $98,146, and Thunder taping on November 10th in Fort Wayne, Indiana drew 3,283 total, which was 1,771 paying $40,425. We don't have complete merchandise figures for the week, but based on what we have, it was doing at a $5.53 per head ratio. The True Hollywood Story for E! Channel on Hulk Hogan is scheduled to run in December. He is also currently working on a similar piece on Jesse Ventura. Extra is also doing a story on Hogan. They interviewed him on November 12th and it's expected to run this week, probably to put over the angle where he walked out of the company because of problems with the new writers. Goldberg was interviewed by Peter Jennings for a World News Tonight 4-part feature on body imagery. Barry and Kendall Windham along with Hector Garza were let go, and it isn't believed they were given the option of renewing on either a lower rate or even a per-match basis. Stevie Ray is currently having his contract renegotiated downward from its $750,000 range, but is expected to stay since his name is being talked about in the storylines. The power plant guys who were let go were Jet Jaguar, Jamie Howard and Jeremy Lopez from Florida, and Dean Roll, Shark Boy, from Ohio. The only one of the Florida guys hired as a group they kept was the guy playing Tony Moranera, who was mentioned last week, was considered the star of that cruiserweight recruiting class. The general belief, and the booking shows this, is that Russo really isn't interested in building cruiserweights in the first place, let alone for the future, so the future job prospects of smaller good workers when work is meaning less and less isn't that good. Garza's career was messed up when he had a botched up knee operation from the same doctor that screwed up Ultimo Dragon's elbow and ended his career, and Rick Steiner's shoulder. In both Garza and Steiner's cases, they were able to return after second operations, but Garza only worked 2 or 3 dates after the second operation before being let go. The current plan now is to keep Juventud Guerrera and do an illegal immigrant angle with him, although depending upon the severity of his shoulder injury, this also could be out the window. This idea was actually suggested by a fan on the WCW internet show, and Russo decided to do it, where they decide to use Guerrero after all, but he can't produce a green card, and he's running from the authorities. Actually, that's the first step in a storyline that may get controversial, since the end result was scheduled to be Guerrero falling in love with a transvestite bodyguard a la the controversial Mark Henry Angle. Apparently the Dustin Runnels 7 character was nixed by standards and practices because it too closely resembled a pedophile character in the movie Powder. The November 23 issue of Weekly Pro Wrestling magazine from Japan has a photo of Tori Wilson with her nipple exposed shot at the October 18 Nitro. Mark Madden has a meeting with management on November 17 to discuss the proposed variety show on Saturday night with Hall and Nash. Neither Hall nor Nash will be at the meeting, as they'll be in England doing promotional work for the WCW tour in February. There are already plans to break Billy Kidman off from the Filthy Animals. WWF. Raw on November 15 in Pittsburgh drew a sellout 13,104, paying $339,332. It opened with a DX interview with Triple H calling out Vince, and Vince made his verbal comebacks on everyone, threatening they'd be sent to jail for attempted vehicular manslaughter, and told Road Dogg that in jail, he'd find out what it's like really doing it doggy style. The rest of the show were segments where supposed Detroit cops were questioning the wrestlers. Basically, the wrestlers got to act cool to authority. The only segment that was funny was the one with Patterson and Briscoe, where Patterson cracked under pressure and Briscoe played his kiss ass to McMahon role. Mankind beat Venus in 451 with a claw. Luna gave Test and Stephanie a wedding present. Test rolled his eyes while this was going on. Angle pinned Godfather when a planted fan with a protest sign saying WWF was a moral distracted Godfather, and Angle pinned him with a back suplex in 257. Angle was booed heavily in his hometown, although they didn't want to risk things, so before the show went on the air, they had Angle cut a promo talking about how much he hated Pittsburgh. China came out with birth control pills, tampons, etc. because Jericho said he'd undergo a sex change operation if he lost. Gangrel then pinned Jericho in 129 with a Northern Lights suplex. Acolytes beat up 4 Physique challenged. That's a nice way of saying fat slobs, guys they met in a bar somewhere. Actually, they did it twice. These segments seem pretty effective at getting the charismatically challenged duo over. In a WWF title match, Show pinned Bulldog in 31 with a choke slam. Show choke slammed Rodney, Pete Gas and Joey Abs after the match. Lawler told the officers that he thought Ross might have something to do with Austin's accident. Dog pinned Snow with the pump handle slam in 414. Foley and Snow said they were given a vacation and are going to Vegas. DX attacked Kane backstage. Jericho tied up Chyna, tried to get her to say that he was the better man. She wouldn't, so he smashed her hand a few times with a hammer. Later they showed Chyna with a fake destroyed hand all swollen and bloodied. Test pinned Gunn with a roll-up in 429. Gunn hit the Famouser after the match. Aside from this being 2 good matches in a row, which is close to a Raw record, but the lack of heat made them not come across as good on TV. This made 6 straight clean finishes, which must be the all-time record for Raw. Triple H beat Kane via DQ in 442 when Triple H goaded Vince into the ring, which caused Kane to be DQ'd. Vince attacked Triple H, got the worst of it, but with Kane's help, Vince pounded on Triple H. Kane ended up choke slamming Triple H after. Maine saw Bossman beat Rock in a hardcore match to determine the #1 contender. Rock grabbed a camera and took a photo during the match. Mainly brawling in the crowd. Rock whipped Bossman with Earl Hebner's belt. He used the rock bottom on the stage. Prince Albert ran in. Rock his Albert with a chair and gave Bossman the people's elbow, but Albert saved. Bossman got the pin in 441 with the Bossman slam. Rock went nuts, destroying Bossman with a chain and Albert with a TV monitor, and they both juiced. Rock also destroyed Sergeant Slaughter, another ref, and Tom Pritchard. Pretty good stuff for what it was. Some more notes from the SmackDown show that aired on November 11th, taped 2 nights earlier from Baltimore. They showed a dress with a stain, Monica Lewinsky, but then Triple H revealed the woman in the dress giving the idea they were gang-banging wasn't really Stephanie McMahon, but some Penn State co-ed. Test actually broke his nose on the ring ropes early in the show but did work the main event. They showed Arnold Schwarzenegger backstage with McMahon, Briscoe and Patterson, later with Rock and later with Austin trying to give everyone the rub. Jericho broke a bottle over Chyna's head and she juiced. Shane McMahon's wife Marissa was the new woman backstage doing interviews. The interview backstage where Schwarzenegger talked about his favorite wrestlers being Bruno Sammartino, superstar Billy Graham and Jesse Ventura wasn't edited off the show. Schwarzenegger claimed that SmackDown was being seen by 500 million people worldwide. I guess 7 million didn't sound impressive enough. The main event finish saw Schwarzenegger doing commentary, and he eventually threw a chair to Austin, who clocked Triple H with it and allowed Test to pin him to end the match. Schwarzenegger gave Triple H an Asia Kong spinning back fist and pounded his ass and then drank beer in the ring with Austin. The crowd loved this. From all accounts, Schwarzenegger did a tremendous job for them. WWF The Music Volume 4 debuted on the Billboard charts this past week at number 4, having sold 215,847 units in its first week. The top two were Rage Against the Machine at 430,022 units and Mariah Carey's CD with 322,842 units sold over the counter. Within the music world, for a CD with no regular radio airplay to do this kind of business is phenomenal. House shows this week saw SmackDown taping on November 9th in Baltimore, drawing a sellout 11,115, paying $311,507. Steve Austin appeared on Regis and Kathy Lee on November 10th, and they showed Deborah Marshall in the crowd, and he noted that she was his girlfriend. A second meeting with Naoto Morishita of Dream Stage Entertainment and the WWF is scheduled for November 30th in Anaheim, California. At this point, what they are discussing would be producing a WWF show for the Tokyo Dome in either June or October, probably on a Friday night. DSE would build a Raw is War-like stage for the show and probably bill it as Raw is War so it would look to Japanese fans like the show they see on television. There is still no deal close to finalization. DSE wants WWF to send them someone like Kurt Angle to make a personal appearance at the November 21st Pride show, or send some people to the January 30th Pride show to basically show the Japanese public they are involved in some form with the WWF to start building interest. Although at this point no plans are for anyone to attend the shows yet. The Major League Baseball All-Century team was number 4 on the sports video list, the highest-ranking non-pro wrestling sports video in months. WWF held down 7 of the top 8 slots, with the top 3 being Rock, Austin's Saga Continues and Best of Raw. Austin's videos were also number 5 and number 6, Women of the WWF was number 7 and DX was number 8, while Michael Jordan was number 9. An old Walter Payton video that hadn't been on the charts ever before came in at number 11. In all, 15 of the top 20 were WWF videos and none were WCW, with the only other pro wrestling video that wasn't WWF on the charts being Wrestling with Shadows at number 17. Darren Drozdov's surgery was with Dr. Lawrence Mermelstein of the Long Island Spine Specialists in Comac, New York. The surgery was an interbody fusion with plates and screws to realign the vertebrae and stabilize the neck fracture to hopefully prevent any further damage to the spinal cord. It was said by those who have knowledge of the true extent of his injuries that it would take nothing short of a miracle for him to return to his prior level of function. At this point he still has no lower body movement, and his upper body movement is a lot more limited than has been let on to many. Mankind is expected to be given some time off because his knees have been bothering him. It's becoming more and more apparent that his career probably only has about a year or two left, something he's pretty well publicly acknowledged. When he was on Wrestling Observer Live a few weeks ago, he said he didn't want to wind up being like the Road Warriors, who were big stars and ended up being seen as jokes because they stayed around too long. He said that people figure it out pretty quick when you're not what you once were, and basically admitted for the past 6 months he hasn't really been what he once was. Reckless Youth, Tom Carter, K. Crush, from NWA Wildside out of Cornelius, Georgia, and Bobcat, a Northeastern wrestler/valet, have signed developmental deals, and Scott Vick, who was Sick Boy in WCW, also signed a contract this week, although that had been inevitable for several weeks. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution did another major story about wrestling toys aimed at children, which also tied WCW merchandise into the equation. The stories, which still revolved around the Al Snow doll, and still hadn't picked up exactly what the head character is supposed to represent, are now bringing up the merchandise with objects like toilet seats to hit wrestlers with, or the dolls that talk when hit in the face, as saying they glorify violence to the young children's audience. Of course, if you go back to Cowboys and Indians, the number of toys that are marketed to children and glorify violence is hardly a small list, and wrestling would be a very minor part of that list. The Village Voice on November 16th noted the misperception about what the Snow doll was supposed to represent, that it was a mannequin head and not a severed woman's head. Still, the piece concluded, a central critique of the WWF today is that wrestlers bring real women into the ring, with unfathomably overstuffed bras, and dares viewers, mostly kids, to ogle them. The brutality to women charge, if not technically correct, ain't such a stretch. Add Target to the list of stores that has banned the Snow doll. Jim Ross on Raw, trying to rally the WWF fan base against this injustice, blamed poor Al Snow, having worked 17 years, for being singled out by a media that shoots first and asks questions later. Of course, when it is written that Snow's doll represents a severed woman's head, that's a valid point. But they'd better hope the media doesn't do its homework and asks the questions in the long run, because in its final form, the head gimmick really isn't about a fantasy friend that whispers advice, it's just a double entendre excuse for the audience to yell "we want head." The WWF has continually mentioned Walmart, since it's the one that got all the pub for doing so, but not mentioned Target, Kmart and Toys R Us, probably as a strategy to not make it seem like the domino effect is already beginning. At one point right after the media stories came out, the doll was going for something like $28 on eBay, but an oversupply quickly drove the price down. British Bulldog did a run-in on the November 12 Stampede wrestling card after a match between his son Harry, who must be about 14 or 15, and a heel named Principal Dave Pound, and is apparently scheduled to wrestle for Stampede on their November 19th show. People magazine is working on an article on Vince. On the November 12th episode of Nash Bridges, there was a shot of Don Johnson and Cheech Marin walking down the street in SF with a WWF banner clearly and perfectly framed in the background. As a general rule, products pay for placement in television shows as a new subliminal form of advertising. This may have been a favor because WWF worked with them in booking Austin for 5 episodes this season. Mancow in Chicago, a regular WWF supporter, ripped on them this week on the Paul White angle because one of his parents died of cancer. He said even though it was presented over the top, it's not a subject that he feels should be made fun of. The only non-pay-per-view house shows this week were the SmackDown taping in Baltimore and the Raw in Pittsburgh, which combined did $165,866 in merchandise or $6.85 per head. Whether it's the clash of titans in the ring or the drama that unfolds outside it, we're here to break it down, match by match, feud by feud. Remember, in the world of wrestling, every day is a battle, and every victory is a story waiting to be told. Until next time, keep the passion alive, and never stop wrestling with the possibilities. This is the Pro Wrestle Machine,